I never thought I'd end up on the graveyard shift. I'd always imagined night shifts as dull, quiet hours where nothing really happened. But when I got assigned to the old cemetery precinct, everything I thought I knew about quiet nights vanished. They told me it was just paperwork, routine patrols, and checking for trespassers. That sounded simple enough, until I walked past the wrought iron gates and felt the first chill creep down my spine. The air was heavier than I expected, thick and damp, carrying a smell that was hard to place, not just wet earth or grass, but something older, something that reminded me of a library of old books that had been left out in the rain. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, even though it wasn't exactly cold, and forced my boots to crunch softly over the gravel path. The cemetery was enormous, stretching farther than I could see in the dim yellow of my flashlight. Shadows pooled between the gravestones, darker than darkness itself. I tried to convince myself it was normal, graves, shadows, and all. After all, that was what cemeteries look like at night, right? But as I walked, I thought I heard murmurs, like distant whispers floating through the air. At first, I told myself it was a wind. I shook my head, laughed quietly under my breath, and muttered something like, "Get a grip, rookie." Still, the whispers didn't stop. They seemed soft, almost polite, like someone talking just out earshot, barely moving their lips. My pace slowed. Every step felt louder, and my own heartbeat seemed to echo in the silence between the stones. I reached the first row of older graves, the ones worn down by time, some cracked, others sinking unevenly into the ground, and stopped. The murmurs felt closer now, as if they were circling me, moving with me. I thought about calling dispatch, asked if anyone else had heard anything, but I didn't. I wasn't even sure what I'd say. There are whispers coming from the tombstones. It sounded ridiculous, even in my own ears. Still, I pulled out my radio, just to feel a sense of control. Static hissed back at me, but no one answered. That was comforting. Somehow, if someone was there, I'd know, and yet the whisper stayed. I decided to walk the main path, the one lined with tall oak trees that scraped the night sky. Their branches reached over like blackened fingers, and the moon, half hidden by clouds, barely lit the ground. Every now and then, a gravestone would seem to lean slightly, as if peering at me. I froze a few times, my stomach tightening. "It's just your eyes playing tricks," I whispered to myself, trying to push the panic down. But deep in my chest, I could feel something like ice settling, creeping along my spine. It didn't take long for me to notice the pattern. The whispers came in waves. When I stopped walking, they seemed to stop too. When I started again, they followed. I tried talking out loud, calling myself an idiot, trying to remind myself that this was a job like any other. "You're imagining it," I said. "Nothing's here but stones and dirt." The words sounded hollow. I reached a section of the cemetery that was older than the rest, a part no one really went anymore. The gravestones were smaller, some unmarked, others so eroded the names had vanished. That's when I noticed it. The murmurs weren't random anymore. They seemed directed, not speaking words I could understand, but forming syllables, sounds, little rhythmic tones that made the hair on my arm stand straight up. It was as if the stones themselves were trying to speak. I stopped dead in my tracks, my flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. I couldn't tell if my eyes were playing tricks or if the shadows were moving. One of the smaller stones, half buried in moss, seemed different. It seemed almost alive. I blinked, and it was just stone again. I blinked a second time, and it felt like it had shifted. My chest tightened. I swallowed hard. I tried to convince myself I should leave, but some part of me, maybe curiosity, maybe foolishness, made me step closer. The whispers intensified, circling me, brushing at the edges of my mind. I could almost make out a pattern, a rhythm, like chanting underwater. It wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding. It was patient, waiting. I remember what the older officers had told me during training, though I had never believed them, that sometimes cemeteries kept things. Not ghosts, not really, but memories. Echoes of the people who'd been buried there, trapped in the stones themselves. They said it was harmless, that it only got loud when someone was alone enough to listen. I laughed nervously at that thought. Harmless or not, I felt my skin prickle with every step. I tried moving on, walking a longer path this time, telling myself that I would make it to the other side of the cemetery, the part near the caretaker's house. But the whispers shifted with me. I could feel the air pressing closer, every movement of the leaves above making soft, scratching sounds, almost like fingers across wood. I began to talk to myself more, telling myself stories, trying to drown out the whispers. Sometimes I laughed. Sometimes I muttered nonsense, anything to make it feel like I wasn't entirely alone. Then I noticed something else. Every so often, one of the gravestones would seem angled toward me, not in the normal way, like leaning because of age, more like someone or something had arranged it to watch. I tried to ignore it, thinking of my training, thinking of logic, thinking of everything rational. But rationality doesn't always survive in the dark, not when everything around you seems alive in a way it shouldn't. I remember sitting down on the damp ground at one point, exhausted, my back against a leaning gravestone. The whispers surrounded me. I could feel them brushing at the edges of my thoughts. I tried counting, tried humming, tried anything to anchor myself. My eyes scanned the cemetery, seeing familiar shapes, stones, trees, the cracked paths. But the longer I looked, the more familiar shapes seemed wrong. Faces, maybe? Or shadows shaped like faces. I couldn't tell. My heart was hammering in my chest. I stayed there for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. And then I heard it. A voice. Clear, soft, and impossibly close. My name. Just my name. Spoken like someone had been waiting for me to hear it. I froze. My blood ran cold. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. The whisper came again, this time forming a pattern I couldn't understand, but knew I was meant to. It felt like the grave itself was breathing, speaking, and watching. I got up and ran. Not the careful patrol run. Not the measured steps officers are trained to take, but full sprint. Gravel dug into my boots. Branches whipped at my jacket. But I didn't care. Every step, every breath, the whispers followed me, circling, patient, knowing. I didn't stop until I reached the main gate, the lights of the cemetery's small office glowing faintly in the distance. I leaned against the gate, panting, feeling the damp chill of the night pressing into my skin. My radio buzzed, static filling my ears. Dispatch, probably asking where I was. I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. My hands were shaking too much. I didn't know if what I had heard was real or if I'd lost my mind. By the time I caught my breath, the whispers had faded. Only the soft wind rustling the leaves remained. Only the shadows pooling in the gravestones. Only the memory of something ancient, patient, and impossibly still, waiting for me to return. And I knew I would, because it wasn't done with me yet. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay awake in the small officer's room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. And every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, that patient whisper, circling, waiting. I thought the first night was bad. I thought the whispers, the lean of the stones, the cold weight of the cemetery pressing down on me. I thought that was the worst it could get. I was wrong. By the second night, I could feel the weight of the place before I even stepped inside the gates. The air smelled damp and earthy, but there was something different this time. A heaviness that pressed on my chest like someone was standing right behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of their breath, though there was no one there. I tried to tell myself it was nerves, rookie jitters, but deep down I knew my body wasn't lying. Something had changed. I started my patrol along the usual path, keeping my flashlight steady, focusing on the stones in front of me. That had always helped, focusing on the tangible, the concrete. But tonight, as I walked, I noticed a low fog curling along the ground. At first, it was just patches, thin and harmless. But the farther I went, the thicker it grew, rolling between the graves like it had a mind of its own. The whispers came first, soft at first, almost polite. Then, suddenly, they were louder, sharper, less like echoes and more like a presence brushing against the edges of my thoughts. I couldn't tell if they were coming from the stones or from the fog itself. Every now and then, I swore I saw a movement within the mist, A shadow slipping from one gravestone to another, too fast, too fluid to be a person. I told myself I was imagining it. Shadows play tricks on you at night. Fog makes everything look like it's alive. And yet, my chest tightened with every step, my stomach twisting into knots I couldn't untangle. The fog seemed to thicken around me, curling along the paths, creeping under my boots, wrapping around my legs like invisible fingers. I tried to shake the feeling, to focus on the crunch of gravel underfoot, but the whispers followed, growing more urgent, circling me with each slow step. I paused by a cluster of older stones, the kind that lean and tilt with age, half buried in moss and dirt. There was one in particular that caught my eye, a simple gray slab, nothing remarkable except the way the fog pooled around it, darker than the rest. I felt drawn to it, a pull I couldn't explain. I shook my head, muttering under my breath, "Don't do this. Don't go near it. Rookie, just keep walking." But I did go near it. I always seem to do what I tell myself not to. And as I stepped closer, I noticed that the whispers weren't just surrounding me. They were inside me, not in my ears, not even my head exactly, but under my skin, pressing on my ribs, twisting around my lungs. My heartbeat raced, and I realized I was holding my breath. Slowly, carefully, I exhaled, but the fog seemed to respond, curling tighter, thickening, hiding the path behind me. And then I saw them. At first, I thought they were statues. Figures standing still among the graves, too far to see clearly, shrouded in fog. But they weren't statues. I know that now. Their shapes shifted, flowing like smoke, but human enough to make me freeze. I could make out heads, shoulders, the vague shape of arms, but nothing else. No faces, no features, just shadows, moving slowly, deliberately, as if they were circling, waiting. I stepped back. My flashlight trembled in my grip, casting a weak circle of light that barely reached the nearest stones. The shadows seemed to react, twisting slightly, almost stretching, but never leaving the fog. I felt a chill run from my feet to my skull, a cold that wasn't the night air. I wanted to call it in, wanted to reach for my radio, but my hands wouldn't move. My whole body was caught in some invisible grip, my mind screaming at me to run, while something deep inside whispered, "Stay." I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe hours, maybe. Time didn't matter. The fog pressed closer with every second, thickening around the shapes, hiding them, letting them vanish just enough to keep me guessing. And all the while, the whispers, soft, patient, urging, wrapped around me like a snake. I tried to put words to them, tried to make sense. "What do you want? Who are you?" I whispered, my voice small against the vast cemetery. Nothing, only the low, steady pulse of the fog, moving like water, carrying the shadows with it. I forced myself to move. Step by step, I tried to walk the path, telling myself that I was imagining it, telling myself that the shapes weren't real, that the whispers weren't speaking. But every time I moved, the shadows shifted. Every time I breathed, the fog swallowed my chest a little more, pressing against me, heavier than air should ever be. My flashlight flickered, and when it did, I thought I saw a figure closer than it had been a second ago, and then further, and then gone. Panic started to creep in, not the sudden kind that makes you jump, but the slow, gnawing kind that eats at your bones, the kind that makes you question every breath, every movement, every memory. I remember my first night, remember the feeling of being watched, the lean of the stones, the subtle pressure in the air. But this was different. This wasn't just being watched. It was being surrounded. I couldn't see where the fog ended and the shadows began. And somehow, I knew they could see me perfectly. I tried to turn back, tried to run toward the main gate, toward the light, toward something real. But the fog seemed to resist. It thickened, curling along my boots, brushing against my jacket, brushing against my skin in a way that made goosebumps rise on my arms. The shapes shifted, flowing like liquid, but always just out of reach, circling me, keeping me inside their slow, deliberate dance. I realized then that the whispers had words. Not words I could understand, not exactly, but I could feel meaning in them pressing at the edges of my mind. You don't belong here. You're not ready. You can't leave. I tried to shake it off, tried to laugh at myself, but the laughter caught in my throat. The fog pressed closer, heavier. The shadows, they were patient. They didn't need to rush. They could wait. I remembered something my sergeant had said during training. A joke that had never felt funnier than it did in that moment. He'd said, "If you ever feel like something is watching in the cemetery, it probably is. But don't worry. It usually just wants to be left alone." I laughed quietly, a sound that felt hollow in my chest. Left alone. I didn't feel left alone. I felt trapped, surrounded by a presence I couldn't see, but that I could feel all around me, pressing in. I kept moving, careful not to make sudden motions, trying to follow the path even though the fog kept shifting, hiding where the stones actually were. Every step felt heavier. My lungs burned. My boots sank into soft patches of earth that hadn't been there a second ago. And through it all, the shadows drifted. Always drifting, never stopping. Always just enough out of reach to make me question what I was seeing. Eventually, I made it to a clearing, a small open space where the fog thinned just a little. I gasped, relief flooding me, and then froze. In the center, a gravestone stood alone, taller than the rest, smooth and black, reflecting the weak moonlight. I couldn't remember it being there before. Its presence felt deliberate, like it had been waiting for me to arrive. The whispers shifted, circling the space, quiet now but sharp, patient. I stared at that stone for a long time. My flashlight quivered in my hands. I wanted to turn and run, wanted to sprint toward the gates, but something held me there, something in the fog, in the shadows, in the low, urgent whispering, told me I couldn't leave yet. I realized then that the fog wasn't just hiding them, it was hurting me, shaping my path, keeping me close. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen and trembling. Time had lost all meaning. The fog rolled around me like water. The shadows circled, patient and deliberate. The whispers brushed against my mind like cold fingers. And in that moment, I understood, deep in my chest, that I had stepped into something alive. Something that had been waiting for a long time. Something that didn't want me to leave, and I didn't think it would let me. I thought the fog and whispers were the worst of it. I thought the shadows drifting between the graves, circling me like patient predators, were the only thing I had to fear. But the third night on the graveyard shift showed me something far more disturbing. Something I wasn't prepared for, and something I can't shake from my memory, no matter how many nights pass. It started like any other shift. I walked the familiar paths, flashlight in hand, notebook clipped to my belt, heart thumping slower than it had the first night, but still uneasy. The fog was thinner this time, just a low mist that clung to the gravestones and curled around the gnarled roots of the old oak trees. The whispers were quieter too, though I could still hear them if I listened closely. By midnight, I wasn't alone. Two other officers, Daniels and Harper, had joined me on patrol. They were both veterans, grizzled and skeptical, the kind of officers who scoffed at what I told them about the whispers and the shadows. "Fog and imagination, rookie," Daniels had said, laughing when I mentioned the sounds. Harper had nodded, adding, "If the graves start talking, we'll know you finally lost it." I should have laughed with them. I should have tried to join in, tried to push the fear down deep where it belonged. But I couldn't. There was a tightness in my chest I couldn't shake, a cold under my skin that made me tense with every step. I felt the fog pressing around us as we walked the main path, circling between the stones, curling around our ankles, brushing our jackets with a damp chill. We split up briefly to cover more ground. I took the east path, where the gravestones leaned and moss grew thick on their surfaces. Daniels and Harper went west, their flashlights bobbing like distant stars. I felt a pang of relief, more space, fewer witnesses, but it didn't last. That's when I noticed the first footprints. They weren't ours. They weren't like anything I'd seen before. The gravel and dirt were soft in the fog, pressed down into shallow impressions that weren't quite human. Too long, too narrow, and they didn't match the rhythm of someone walking. They were uneven, almost deliberate, leading me deeper into the cemetery. I called out to Daniels and Harper, my voice catching the mist, but there was no answer, only silence, only the soft, wet press of the fog against my face. I followed the footprints. I shouldn't have. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to stick to the main path, to stay with the others. But I couldn't. Some part of me, a mix of curiosity and foolish courage, made me step off the path and into the damp earth. My boots sank slightly with each step, and I noticed the fog had thickened here, curling around me like smoke. Shadows twisted between the stones, moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. And I could hear it, the faintest whisper of laughter, soft and mocking, brushing against my ears. I called out again. "Daniels, Harper, you guys there?" My own voice sounded strange, high and tight in the damp air. No answer, only whispers, curling around the stones, pressing into my chest. And then I saw Harper, or at least what I thought was Harper, a flicker of movement behind a row of older graves, just a shadow in the mist. I ran toward it, heart hammering, voice cracking. "Harper," I shouted, but when I got closer, there was nothing. No officer, just an empty patch of earth, the fog swirling as if nothing had ever been there. I stopped, chest heaving, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. My flashlight trembled in my hands, and then I heard it, a sound so subtle, so quiet at first that I thought it was a wind, but it wasn't. It was a voice. Not Harper's voice, not Daniel's. Something else. Low, rasping, deliberate. It whispered my name, dragging it out slowly, savoring it, curling around my mind until I could barely think. Panic rose in my chest, thick and choking. I spun around, trying to retrace my steps, trying to find the path back to the main trail. And that's when I noticed something worse. Daniels and Harper, they were gone, not just out of sight. Gone. No sound. No footprints leading away. No signal on the radio. Nothing. It was as if they had never existed at all. I called their names, screamed, banged on the gravestones with my fists, but all I heard in return was my own breath, ragged and loud in my ears, and the soft, patient whispers pressing closer. I ran. I ran through the fog, trying to find the path back, trying to find something familiar, but the cemetery had changed. The rows of gravestones seemed longer, twisted slightly, leaning in ways they hadn't before. The familiar oak trees bent in strange angles, their branches clawing at the sky. Every time I thought I'd found the main path, it disappeared into the fog, leaving me lost and alone. And the footprints followed me. Not my own, not Daniel's or Harper's. Something else, always just ahead, leading me deeper, circling me, keeping me from turning back. I tried to ignore them, tried to tell myself it was my mind, my fear, playing tricks, but I couldn't. There was a logic to them, a pattern that chilled me more than any shadow or whisper ever could. They weren't random. They were waiting. I stopped near a group of older stones, worn and cracked, trying to catch my breath. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I leaned against a leaning stone and tried to calm myself, tried to force reason into my panicked thoughts. Daniels and Harper were officers, veterans. They wouldn't just vanish. I kept repeating it in my head, over and over, clinging to it like a lifeline. But then I saw it, or rather, I saw them. Figures moving in the fog, just barely visible, shifting between the stones. Not the shadows I had seen before, not the drifting shapes in the mist. These were taller, more deliberate, human-like, but not quite human. I couldn't see their faces, couldn't see their hands, but I could feel their attention, focused entirely on me. They didn't walk. They glided, slow and patient, circling the graves where my fellow officers had last been. And with every step, I heard it, the faint, wet crunch of something dragging along the ground. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. My hands were trembling so violently that I almost dropped the flashlight. I wanted to scream, to call for help, to do anything to break the spell the cemetery had wrapped around me. But no words came, only the sound of my heartbeat, loud and frantic, and the dragging crunch echoing in the fog. I tried to run again, forcing my legs to move through the thickening mist. Every time I thought I had put distance between myself and the shadows, They were closer, not chasing me, exactly, more like waiting for me to catch up. I realized that the footprints weren't just guiding me. They were hurting me, shaping my path through the graves, keeping me trapped in the fog's slow, deliberate grip. Hours must have passed, or maybe minutes. I can't be sure. Time was meaningless here. And then I saw them, Daniels and Harper. Or at least I thought I did. Two figures crouched near a gravestone, motionless, just shadows among shadows. Relief washed over me, sharp and sudden. I called their names, stumbling toward them. But as I drew closer, the fog shifted and they were gone again. The ground was empty, the gravestone alone, the footprints leading away like a trail of smoke. I sank to my knees, the flashlight clattering to the wet earth beside me. I could feel my sanity fraying, the edges of my mind loosening in the fog. The whispers were louder now, circling me, pressing in, teasing, almost conversational. They're yours now. You can't leave. You're next. I wanted to fight it, wanted to run, wanted to scream. But the cemetery had claimed something from me that night, a certainty that I would never see them again, and that I was alone, truly alone, in a place that didn't follow the rules of the living. Eventually, I found my way back to the main path, though not the one I had come on. The fog thinned just enough for familiar oak trees to come into view. I staggered toward the distant lights of the precinct office, my boots soaked, my uniform clinging to me, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't speak. I didn't explain. I didn't want to believe anyone would understand. I just made it inside, slammed the door behind me, and collapsed against the wall. The radio crackled to life. Dispatch, asking if I was okay. I nodded, though no one could see me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. The images, the shadows, the dragging crunch of unseen feet. It was all still there, crawling along the edges of my mind. And I knew that tomorrow night, and the night after, the cemetery would be waiting, and my fellow officers. Well, I wouldn't even know where to look. I didn't sleep after the third night. I couldn't. Not really. Every time my eyes closed, I saw fog curling through the cemetery, dragging my fellow officers away into nothingness, following those impossible footprints that led nowhere. My mind wouldn't let it go. The whispers were still there, just behind my thoughts, waiting. I barely remembered eating, barely remembered showering, barely remembered feeling anything besides the weight of that night pressing into me like stone. The fourth night, I went back. I don't know why. Maybe it was some foolish need to understand, to see if I had really lost my mind. Maybe it was a part of me that knew I had already been claimed, that the cemetery had taken something from me I couldn't retrieve. Whatever it was, I walked back through those gates with a flashlight in one hand and a notebook in the other, feeling the cold press of the air against my skin, heavier than before. The mist had returned, not thin patches like last night, but a rolling, thick cloud that clung to the gravestones and wrapped around my boots. The whispers were louder, sharper, almost intelligible. I kept telling myself they weren't real, that they were echoes of my own fear bouncing back at me. But my mind didn't believe it. Not anymore. My heartbeat was fast, shallow, almost deafening in the still night. I walked slowly, my eyes scanning the rows of stones. Some of them seemed familiar. Stones I had passed before, stones I thought I had memorized. But now, as I moved through the fog, they shifted, tilted slightly, changed their angles. I could swear that one of them leaned just a fraction closer, as if acknowledging me, waiting for me to see it. I knew which one it was before I even saw it. There was a grave I had glimpsed on the first night, near the far edge of the cemetery, older than the rest, smaller, almost insignificant in the sprawling rows of stones. Something about it had unsettled me then. Something about the way the fog seemed to gather around it, heavier, darker, like water pooling in a hollow. And now, walking toward it through the thickening mist, I felt it pull at me, guiding me, insisting that I approach. My flashlight trembled in my hands, the beam flickering over cracked and moss-covered gravestones. The whispers rose in pitch, circling me, brushing against the edges of my mind. My chest tightened. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Some invisible thread had tied me to that grave. and I was walking forward whether I wanted to or not. When I finally reached it, I stopped. The gravestone was small, plain, almost ordinary, except for the way it seemed alive. I didn't understand it at first. Stone doesn't breathe. Stone doesn't shift or lean on its own. But this one seemed to pulse slowly, subtly, like it was breathing, like it was aware of me. I swallowed hard and ran my hand over the rough surface. The stone was cold, wet with dew, and moss clung to my fingers. And then I felt it, not under my fingers, not even on my skin, but in my chest, deep in my bones. A vibration, a hum. The whispers were louder now, circling me, low and deliberate, speaking in syllables I couldn't understand, but that carried meaning. You were expected. You were chosen. I stepped back, shaking. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the fog, the moisture, my imagination. But my instinct screamed otherwise. I felt the presence of something enormous, patient, ancient, waiting inside that stone. Something that had been watching me for nights, waiting for me to come close enough to notice. The whispers began to form words, just barely, curling around the edges of my mind. I didn't speak them aloud. I couldn't. I felt my tongue stiffen, my throat close. The stone, it was speaking to me, not through sound, but through thought, through a pressure that pressed on my skull and chest, curling into my brain like smoke. Look closer. I knelt down, flashlight trembling, eyes narrowing. At first, there was nothing, just rough gray stone, cracked and weathered, moss growing in the crevices. But as I stared, my vision seemed to sharpen, a mist curling around the letters etched into the surface. And then I saw it, words, carved deep into the stone. Not names, not dates, but a message. My name, carved as if the stone had known me, had waited for me. Beneath it, other words formed, words that I could read but couldn't comprehend fully. You cannot leave. You are ours. Watch and remember. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, a cold sweat running down my back. I wanted to speak, to shout, to tear my eyes away, but something inside me, the same part that had drawn me here, kept me rooted. I stared, trembling, feeling the pulse of the stone in time of my own heartbeat. The whispers circled me, more insistent now, pushing me to read, to understand, to obey. I tried to run. I really did. My boots sank into the wet earth as I stumbled backward, away from the stone, but the fog pressed closer, curling around my legs, holding me in place. The shadows from earlier nights seemed to rise from the mist, forming shapes just beyond the reach of my flashlight, circling the grave. They didn't move fast, didn't need to. They waited, patient and deliberate, for me to accept what I had seen. And then I realized something impossible. The words, the message carved into stone, had changed, not my memory of them. I remembered exactly what had been there a second ago, but now, new words had appeared beneath the first. You will join them. Tonight, I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the fog. The shadows circled tighter, almost impatient. My chest heaved, air coming in shallow gasps. I backed away, trying to focus on the gravel path I had taken, trying to find a way out, but the cemetery had shifted again. The rows of stones had changed. The familiar paths warped into angles I didn't recognize. My instincts told me I was lost, truly lost, and that the stone had something to do with it. Something alive, something patient, something that had been waiting for me to come close enough to see. I dropped to my knees, my hands pressed to the wet earth, trying to calm myself, try and make sense of it. Rationality felt useless here. Logic was a joke. I had been walking among shadows and whispers for nights, and now the stone itself had spoken to me. I could feel it in my chest, a cold, deliberate pulse, as if it had read every fear I carried inside me, every doubt, every weakness, and was savoring it. I thought about Daniels and Harper, about the way they had vanished, leaving only echoes and footprints that led nowhere. I thought about the fog, the shadows, the whispers that had been circling me all along, and I realized something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't here by accident. I had been expected. I had been chosen. And whatever this stone was, Whatever lived in the mist and the shadows had plans for me. My flashlight flickered and went out. The fog pressed closer, wrapping around me like water, obscuring everything but the faint glimmer of the stone's wet surface. The whispers rose again, urgent, almost hungry. I could feel shapes moving in the mist, shadows circling, waiting. I could feel the pulse of the stone in my chest, as if it had imprinted itself on me, claiming a part of me I didn't even know existed. I fell back against the ground, hands over my face, trying to block it out, trying to tell myself it wasn't real. But the message on the stone was real. My name, and the promise beneath it. I couldn't leave. I wouldn't be allowed. The whispers told me so. The fog told me so. The shadows told me so. And the stone, breathing impatient and impossibly alive, confirmed it. Hours or minutes passed. I don't know how long I stayed there, trembling in the mist, pressed against the wet earth. When I finally forced myself to stand, the stone was still there, unyielding, unblinking. The words hadn't changed, at least not outwardly, but I could feel them inside me, carved into my thoughts, impossible and permanent. I backed away slowly, the fog swirling, shadows gliding just beyond the light. I didn't look back until I was out of the clearing, back on a path that felt familiar, though I knew it wasn't. I made it back to the main gate, heart hammering, lungs burning, soaked with sweat and dew. The office lights were a distant glow, and I ran toward them, not daring to stop. My radio crackled with static. Dispatch called my name. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. Not after what I had seen. Not after what the stone had done. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The message followed me everywhere, in every shadow, every whisper, every heartbeat. The stone had marked me, claimed me in some way I couldn't explain. And I knew, deep in the pit of my stomach, that I would have to return, that the fog, the whispers, and the shadows were waiting, and that the stone would speak again, because it had not finished with me. I had been on the night shift for almost 6 months when I first noticed the calls. At first, I didn't think much of it. Night shifts are lonely, and sometimes people dial the wrong number. But when it kept happening night after night, something about it started to feel wrong. The graveyard precinct isn't large. The building is old, brick walls with peeling paint, fluorescent lights that buzz at the worst possible times, and one phone that never seems to stop ringing. The officers joked that it only rang for ghosts. I laughed too at first, but after a while, the humor didn't reach my eyes. It started around midnight. Every night, the phone would ring once, sharply, breaking the silence of the office, and then nothing. No one on the line. No background noise. Just silence. The caller ID was always blank. No number, no location, nothing. At first, I answered it like any normal call. Graveyard precinct, officer speaking. A pause. Silence. And then a faint sound, barely audible, like someone breathing. I thought maybe it was a bad connection. A prank? Someone trying to scare a rookie. But it wasn't a prank. I could feel it in my chest. A tightening, a pulse of cold dread I couldn't explain. I told the sergeant. He didn't laugh, but he didn't take it seriously either. Phones get old, wires get crossed. Don't overthink it, he said. Easy words meant to calm me, but they didn't. They couldn't, because every night, exactly at midnight, the same call would come. The second night, I answered again. Hello? My voice sounded louder than I expected in the quiet office. There was a pause, long enough to make my stomach twist. And then, very faintly, I heard my name. Just my name, spoken softly. A whisper barely above the hum of the fluorescent lights. I froze, hand gripping the receiver. Who is this? I whispered, almost afraid to speak. The line went dead. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the blank display on the phone. No number, no record, just the lingering echo of my name. The next few nights, I started keeping track. Midnight, ring, silence, whispers, my name, sometimes stretched, almost like it was being drawn out on purpose. I tried to explain it logically, tried to remind myself I was alone on a quiet shift, that my mind was playing tricks. But even then, I could feel it. Something waiting at the edge of my awareness, pressing against the quiet office walls, lingering in the corners. I began answering with caution, holding the phone a little away from my ear. Sometimes I thought I heard more than just my name. Faint murmurs, almost like distant voices talking to each other, whispering things I couldn't quite understand. Sometimes it sounded like laughter, soft and wet, curling into the silence. I'd slam the phone down, heart racing, telling myself it was just a line crossing, static, nothing more. But it wasn't nothing. One night, I stayed on the line longer. I had the nerve, or the foolishness, to keep the receiver pressed to my ear, straining to catch the whispers. And then I heard it. Not words, not fully. Just syllables. Rhythmic, deliberate. Like someone trying to form a message but stopping just short. My pulse hammered in my ears. My chest tightened. It was as if the sound wasn't coming from the phone at all, but from inside me. My head, my chest, somewhere I couldn't reach, but couldn't ignore. I almost hung up, but something held me there. Some terrible curiosity. Some pull I didn't want to admit. And that's when I heard it clearly. A single deliberate sentence, whispered in a voice that didn't belong to any person I knew. You will come tonight. I dropped the receiver and stumbled back, hands shaking, my vision blurred, and I had to lean against the desk to keep from collapsing. The office felt suddenly too quiet, too still, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stared at the phone, a buzzing in my ears, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to think. The line went dead, the display blank. My name, the whisper, the message gone, as if it had never existed. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, sleep deprivation, stress, but I knew better. I knew. The next night, I brought a notebook, something to record what happened. Midnight came, sharp and sudden. The phone ringing like a bell cutting through the quiet. I answered, hand shaking, breath tight. Hello. Silence. Then a whisper. My name. Short, deliberate. And then another. You will come tonight. I wrote it down, shaking, trying to steady my hand. The letters blurred as my heart pounded. I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. But I couldn't ignore it. The repetition, the insistence, the way it felt like it was dragging me towards something I couldn't see yet. After that, the calls became more frequent, not just at midnight. Sometimes earlier, sometimes later. Always blank ID. Always whispers. Always that same sense of inevitability pressing against me, guiding me, shaping me. I started to notice other things in the office. Shadows that seemed too long. Corners that felt cold even with the heat on. The faintest touch of air that brushed my skin when no one was near. One night, I left the receiver off the hook just to see. I sat in the dim glow of the fluorescent lights, listening, waiting. And I heard it, not my name, not the sentence, but something else. Something lower, almost indistinct, but insistent. Follow. I didn't want to. I couldn't want to, but I felt a pull. Not physical, not real in the way I could touch, but a weight pressing against my mind, shaping my thoughts, curling around my fear. I felt the fog outside the office, the old cemetery gates, the rows of stones just beyond the lights, and I knew it was connected. The calls weren't just calls. They were warnings, invitations, threats, promises, something that could only be understood if I obeyed. I stopped sleeping altogether. I stayed in the office after my shift, listening to the lines, watching the shadows, tracing the corners of the room. Every time the phone rang, I flinched, heart hammering, and every time I answered, I felt that pull, that insistence, that weight of something unseen pressing into me. The blank caller ID, the whispers, the words that seemed to curl into my brain. They became my nights. My mind, my senses, my memory, all of it wrapped around the phone. I started to notice patterns. The calls came more often when the moon was high, when the mist rolled in over the cemetery, when the wind bent the trees in certain ways. The whispers were louder then, more insistent, and the office didn't feel like a building anymore. It felt like a threshold, a thin barrier between me and something waiting, just beyond my reach, unseen but very real. I realized one night that I could no longer tell the difference between what was in the office and what was outside. The shadows, the whispers, the weight, they followed me inside. They lingered in the fluorescent hum, pressed against the walls, curled around the desk, brushing my arms when I reached for coffee or a notebook. They became part of the room, and the room became part of me. And still, the phone rang. It rang at midnight, at 1, at 2. Always blank. Always silent until I answered. Always my name. Always a command. Always that impossibly patient insistence. I began to dread the sound more than anything. I would hide, cover my ears, tell myself it was just a machine. But no matter what I did, it would ring again. And then I understood. I understood that I wasn't being warned. I wasn't being taunted. I was being prepared, being drawn closer to something I couldn't see yet. But that was already waiting patiently, knowing I would answer, knowing I would follow, knowing that one night I wouldn't be able to ignore it. I don't know what happens on that night. I don't want to know yet. All I know is the phone, the calls, the whispers, the weight of inevitability pressing into my mind like stone. Every shift now, every minute, every second, I hear the memory of that first midnight call. My name whispered, slow and deliberate. You will come tonight. And I know one night I will. I thought the phone ringing at midnight was bad. I thought the empty caller ID, the whispers, the impossibly patient insistence of hearing my name was enough to unhinge someone. But that was before we started checking the voicemail recordings. It began a few nights after the calls became relentless. Officer Daniels, ever the skeptic, decided we should record the lines, just to prove there was nothing there. You'll see, rookie, he said, his voice tight with a mix of irritation and disbelief. Nothing to worry about. Old lines, crossed wires, echoes. So we set up the recorder. The phone line clicked like it always did when a call came in, and we let it ring. Midnight came, sharp and sudden. The receiver rang once, twice, then went silent as usual. We waited, tense, breath tight in the quiet office. The recorder had captured only faint static at first, the dull hum of the line. Then it happened. The static shifted, subtle, like the air itself was bending, and a voice whispered. Not clear words at first, just syllables elongated and soft, curling around the edges of our sanity. I felt it in my chest, like a cold hand pressing against my ribs. Daniels leaned in, frowning, notebook forgotten on the desk. Did you hear that? He asked, voice low. I nodded, unable to speak. My hands were cold, and the hair on my arm stood up. Harper, usually more patient, leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk. The voice spoke again, more deliberately this time. A name. My name. The sound slithered to the static, curling around my ears, pressing at the back of my skull. I recognized it instantly. It was me. My own voice? No, not exactly. It was my name, but stretched and distorted, echoing like someone had dragged it across a cavern wall. And then the warning came. Danger approaching. We all froze. Not the kind of freeze that comes from surprise, but the kind that sinks into your bones, makes your stomach twist, makes your lungs tighten. The air itself seemed heavier, pressing down like water. None of us moved. The recorder hissed and clicked, picking up only fragments now. Whispers too low to understand. Syllables broken. Names repeated over and over, each one chilling, deliberate, purposeful. I glanced at Daniels. He was pale, staring at the recorder like it had grown fangs. Harper's hands shook, reaching to press pause, but neither of them could bring themselves to touch the buttons. Something about the sound, about the way the whispers lingered in the room, made it impossible to stop listening. More names followed. Names of officers I knew. Names I didn't. Each one whispered as if it were a breath in the dark, curling through the office, reaching into our minds, brushing against memories we didn't want to think about. And each time, the final syllable lingered, a warning suspended like a weight over our heads. Tonight, the recorder hissed and the whisper stretched, long and low, a tone that didn't belong to any human voice I'd ever heard. You will? I swallowed hard, throat tight. I wanted to turn away, to leave the office, to slam the door and never come back. But something kept me glued to the desk, fingers frozen near the recorder. The whispering names, the distorted warnings, the impossible insistence. It had a gravity I couldn't escape. It wasn't just sound. I could feel it crawling along my nerves, pressing on my mind. It tugged at memory, making me see things I shouldn't have remembered. Shadows moving in the cemetery, footprints that led nowhere, figures disappearing into mist. My own heart thumped in my chest, a frantic drum I could feel in my ears louder than the recorder's hiss. And then I heard a new sound, not on the recording, not even in the room, somewhere behind me. Soft, deliberate, almost human, but wrong. My hair rose instantly. Daniels leaned closer, whispering, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, unable to speak. Harper was pale, hand pressed to her mouth, and then it clicked. The whispers on the recording weren't alone. They were part of something bigger, something watching, something patient, something that had been listening all along. I turned slowly, trying to see through the dim light of the office. Nothing, just the desk, the chairs, the walls, and the old phone with its constant hum. But the weight of it pressed down anyway. I could feel it curling around my shoulders, my arms, my spine. I could feel it watching, waiting. The recording continued. More names, more warnings. Some were familiar. Officers who had retired, officers who had transferred, officers who had disappeared. Each name carried a subtle tone of fear, a thread of finality. And then one name, my name, repeated 3 times. Slow, deliberate, certain, and the message followed. Clear this time, though distorted, stretched across the static. You cannot hide. They are near. Tonight. The office felt impossibly cold, and I shivered. I looked at Daniels. His hands were trembling. Harper had pressed both hands to her ears, rocking slightly. I wanted to move, to do something, but my limbs felt heavy, weighted by the sound. We sat there, listening to the voicemails, each one a mix of names and warnings, and each one sinking further into our minds. I realized then that this wasn't just a haunting, not just a trick of old wires. These were messages, messages meant for us. Me, something was trying to tell us, to prepare us, to warn us, or perhaps to trap us. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe the recordings were tampered with, the sound distorted on purpose. But deep down I knew that these voices, these whispers, these warnings, they were coming from the cemetery, from beyond the graves, from whatever had been moving in the fog, from whatever had claimed the other officers, from whatever had whispered my name into the receiver night after night. The clock ticked past 1. The room was silent, except for the static hissing in the recorder, but the weight of the voices lingered. I could still hear them in my mind, each name, each warning, each fragment of sound curling around my thoughts, refusing to be ignored. I could feel the pull, the insistence, like gravity itself had changed and the center was somewhere in the cemetery. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows shifting between gravestones, fog curling around figures I couldn't fully see. Every time I tried to eat, to sleep, to do anything normal, the names echoed in my mind, soft and insistent, warning me, reminding me. I started keeping my own recordings. Midnight calls, morning calls, calls at odd hours. Always blank ID, always whispers, always names, always warnings. Each one a thread pulling me closer to the cemetery, to the fog, to the shadows, to whatever waited just out of sight. And then I heard something new, not on the recordings, not in the office, but in my mind. Clear, insistent, almost a thought that was mine. You cannot ignore us. We are coming. I froze, staring at the phone. My hand shook so badly I could barely hold it. The air pressed down, heavier than the walls of the office, tighter than the night outside, suffocating in its weight. The whispers of names, the warnings of approaching danger, the impossible insistence. They weren't just recordings. They were instructions, orders, a map, leading me somewhere I didn't want to go but couldn't avoid. I haven't answered a call since. I haven't dared. I leave the phone off the hook, staring at it, trembling, hoping, praying, that ignoring it will be enough. But I know better. I know the voices are patient. I know they're recording, whispering, waiting, and I know deep in my chest that when they call again and I listen, I will hear my name. And then I will know that whatever is coming, whatever has been speaking to the lines, has finally found me. I started to notice the footsteps on my second week at the graveyard. Not the normal crunch of boots on gravel. Not the distant rattle of branches in the wind. No, these were different. It was during my routine patrol, just past midnight. The cemetery was quiet, the fog thickening between the rows of gravestones, curling around the crooked oaks, pressing damp against my uniform. I'd walked these paths countless times, memorized the angles and the twists, the way the older graves leaned like they were listening. But that night, something was wrong. I thought I heard at first as a faint echo, soft and irregular, like someone stepping on wet soil far behind me. I froze, hand instinctively reaching for my flashlight. It was nothing, just the wind. I told myself that. But the rhythm of the sound didn't match the rustling of leaves. It wasn't a branch snapping or water dripping. It was deliberate, slow, then fast, then slow again. Not like a human walking. Not like a patrol officer like me. I quickened my pace, heart hammering. Every step I took seemed louder, heavier, and the footsteps behind me matched mine almost perfectly, but with a strange delay, like a warped echo of my own movement. I spun around. Nothing. The fog was thick enough to hide everything beyond a few feet, but I would have seen a person, a shadow, a figure, anything. But there was nothing that I started to walk faster, boots crunching the gravel, the cold air biting at my lungs. And still they followed. Footsteps, echoing, just behind me, just beyond reach. I stopped again. The sound didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, heavier, deliberate, almost impatient. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice felt weak, swallowed instantly by the fog. Silence. Only the footsteps. And then something worse. The sound changed. It split into two, then three, circling me, tracing the gravestones in impossible directions, always just beyond my sight. I felt them before I saw them. A pressure in the air, something heavy and patient, tracking me that I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps I was imagining it, a combination of exhaustion, fear, and the stories I've been told about this place. But my instinct screamed otherwise. I could feel it in my chest, in the pit of my stomach. Something was here. Something that shouldn't exist in the light of the living. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, wrapping the graves in a pale, shifting veil. And then I saw movement, not figures, not shadows exactly, but disturbances in the fog, like ripples over water, forming shapes that disappear when I try to focus. The footsteps kept coming, not matching my pace anymore. Slower, heavier, more deliberate, as if whatever was had stopped pretending to mimic me and was now moving on its own. I tried to run. My boots slipped on the damp grass and gravel. Every step I took was mirrored by those unnatural sounds, echoing, stretching, growing heavier. I stumbled, catching myself on a leaning gravestone. The fog wrapped tighter, pressing against my ears, my eyes, my chest. I felt in my bones, like ice crawling along my spine. I stopped, breathing hard, trying to listen past panic. The footsteps paused too, just for a moment, and then resumed. But now they weren't just behind me. They were all around me, circling, patient, deliberate. And something changed in the sound. It wasn't just the impact on gravel or soil anymore. There was weight in it, not human weight. A dragging, a pull, like something enormous shifting through the earth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call for backup. But my throat was tight. My lungs burned with every shallow breath. The footsteps, no, it was moving closer. I could feel the vibration through the soles of my boots, through the thin soles of my hands pressed against the damp earth as I steadied myself. I spun my flashlight in frantic arcs. Beams cutting through fog, illuminating gravestones, earth, the occasional twisted tree. Nothing. Only fog. Only shadows. Only the sound of impossible footsteps circling, weaving through the rows like a predator. I started moving again, trying to follow the main path, trying to get back to the office, trying to leave. But the cemetery was different at night. Paths shifted in the fog. Gravestones seemed to lean, closing off what should have been open space. Every direction I turned, the footsteps followed, sometimes slower, sometimes faster, keeping me trapped in a maze of mist and stone. And then I heard it. Not footsteps this time. A sound like earth moving, gravel shifting, but rhythmic, deliberate. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. It came from below, from the ground. Not behind me, not ahead, but beneath. I could feel it in the soles of my boots, in the tips of my fingers brushing against gravestones. A vibration, low and deliberate, crawling along the earth like something waking. I crouched, trying to steady myself. Every instinct told me to run, to leave, to call for help. But the fog, the weight, the unnatural sound held me in place. And then I understood these weren't ordinary footsteps. Not human, not animal, not anything I'd ever encountered. They belonged to something that didn't follow the rules of the living. Something patient. Something aware. Something that had been following me all night. I thought of Daniels and Harper. The strange calls. The voicemails. The whispers. Every warning had led to this moment. And I realized with a sickening certainty. This presence had been watching me. Listening. Waiting. And now it had revealed itself in the only way it could. Through sound, through movement, through impossible footsteps that didn't obey the rules of life. I forced myself to move again, though each step felt like wading through water. The fog swallowed everything, but the footsteps remained. Always behind, always beside, always somewhere I couldn't locate. Every step forward made the sound heavier, like the earth itself was pressing against me, shaping my path, hurting me. I reached an older section of the cemetery. Gravestones cracked and leaning, names eroded, moss-thick and slick. The fog was so thick, I could barely see the flashlight beam a few feet ahead. And then I heard it more clearly. A pause in the pattern of the footsteps. Silence. A single thump. And then another. Beneath me? Beside me? I couldn't tell. And then came a whisper. Carried on the fog, impossible and deliberate. My name. Drawn out, patient, reverent. Followed by a sound I couldn't identify. Gravel or soil shifting. Something heavy being dragged along the earth. Slow and deliberate. I felt in my chest, my bones. A weight pressing in, telling me something without words. I ran. I don't remember running. Only stumbling, falling, dragging myself forward through the mist. Every step accompanied by that impossible echo. And then, just as suddenly, the sound stopped. No footsteps. No dragging, no whispers, only the fog, the cold air, the leaning stones. Silence so deep it roared in my ears. I leaned against a gravestone, hands trembling, chest heaving. The flashlight was steady now, but I didn't dare move it. I didn't dare breathe too deeply. The fog was still, the world quiet, but I could feel it. Still there, waiting, patient, around me, beneath me, in the air itself. When I finally found my way back to the main path, the footsteps were gone, not fading into the distance, not disappearing naturally, gone, as if they had never existed, leaving nothing but the memory of them vibrating through my bones. I made it back to the precinct office, drenched in sweat, knees shaking. I didn't speak. I didn't explain. I just sat at my desk, flashlight still in hand, listening to the quiet hum of the office. I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd followed me and that the impossible way of the footsteps had entered the walls, the floor, the very air. Even now, thinking back, I can feel them, echoing behind me, impossible and patient. Every step I take in life, every creak of a floorboard, every rustle in the dark. I hear them, not always close, not always tangible, but there, waiting, watching, moving in a rhythm I will never control. And I know, deep in my chest, that the footsteps are patient. They will wait for me. They will come again. And next time, I may not escape. I had to know. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on anything but the phone. Every time it rang, every time the voicemail whispered a name or warned of approaching danger, my mind returned to the same question. Who, or what, was behind it? Who could be calling from a blank number, whispering through static, commanding me with a voice that didn't belong to anyone living? The precinct didn't help. The sergeant shrugged when I pressed the issue, telling me old wiring could cause crosstalk, that phones pick up signals from far-off lines. But I knew better. This wasn't a technical error. This was deliberate. And if I want to survive or understand, I had to trace it myself. I spent nights reviewing the recordings, isolating the frequencies, following the faint pulses beneath the static. It took longer than I expected. The calls weren't constant. They weren't regular. But I could track subtle patterns in the hum of the line. Patterns that led me closer to something. Something physical. Something waiting. One night, after weeks of obsessing, I found it. A trail hidden in the static. A faint signature, almost imperceptible, guiding me to the far edge of the cemetery. Past the old oak grove. Past the rows of leaning gravestones. To a place I'd never dared to explore. The abandoned mausoleum. It was easy to miss. Covered in ivy, half collapsed in places, the stonework crumbling and blackened by time. The iron gates were rusted shut, twisted by age, but I forced them open with my flashlight and a length of pipe I carried from the office. The smell hit me immediately. Damp stone, decay, the faint but unmistakable scent of earth that had been disturbed. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself inside. The mausoleum was small, surprisingly so, with narrow aisles and shelves carved into the walls for caskets. Dust and cobwebs covered everything. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing cracked marble, toppled urns, and a faint smear of something dark along the floor. I swallowed hard. The air was thick, heavy, impossible to breathe fully, yet it pressed insistently against my lungs. And then I heard it. Not the footsteps this time, not the phone. A voice, faint, almost impossible to locate, coming from the far corner of the room. My name, slow, deliberate, the same voice from the calls. Whispering, waiting, urgent, patient, demanding. I froze. My fingers tightened around the pipe. I told myself to leave, to run, to close the gates and never look back. But some part of me, a foolish, desperate part, moved toward the sound. Each step echoed against the stone walls, hollow and sharp, swallowed by the mausoleum. The voice didn't respond to sound or movement, didn't pause. It just continued, faint, curling into my ears like smoke. I reached the far corner. There, leaning against the wall, I saw it. A phone. Old. Rotary. Off the hook. It wasn't connected to anything that made sense. No wires leading out, no plugs, nothing. Just there. And when I saw it, the hair on my arms rose. The static hummed faintly in the air, and the whispers from the calls were louder, clearer, as if the voice had been waiting, living inside this thing. I lifted the receiver, trembling. My reflection in the dusty glass behind the phone stared back at me, pale, haunted, eyes wide. And then I understood. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't someone on the other end of the line. It was this place, the mausoleum itself. Something inside these walls had been speaking, had been using the line to reach me, to warn me, to lure me. I tried to rationalize it. Some hidden speaker, a long-abandoned PA system, a trick of the wiring. But my mind didn't believe it. Not after weeks of calls, whispers, warnings. Not after hearing the names, my name, my own voice stretched and distorted across the static. No, this was alive. This was deliberate. This mausoleum was the vessel, a conduit, something patient and old, waiting for the living to come close enough to listen. I sank to my knees, hands gripping the sides of the phone. The voice whispered again, slow and deliberate. You know now. You see now. You cannot leave yet. The words pressed into me. Heavy, impossible to ignore. My chest tightened. I wanted to throw the receiver down, run, collapse outside in the fog. But I couldn't. Not yet. My curiosity, my fear, my obsession, some part of me demanded I stay, demanded I understand, demanded I witness what had been speaking to me for weeks. I turned, flashlight shaking, trying to see further into the mausoleum. And that's when I noticed it. Carvings in the walls. Faint, almost hidden beneath years of dust and grime. Names. dates, words that shouldn't belong here. Some familiar, some I didn't recognize. But each one carried a weight, a warning, a record, a history of voices trapped or summoned or perhaps used. And then I saw a pattern. One section of wall, larger, more deliberate, a circle of names, dates of death, and at the center, my name. I reeled back, the flashlight slipping in my sweat-slicked hands, my name carved into stone, and beneath it, another message. You have answered. You are chosen. Watch, listen, obey. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced. Weeks of calls, whispers, warnings. Everything pointed here. Not to someone playing a joke. Not to a prank. Not to a technical error. But to this mausoleum, abandoned, rotting, alive with something ancient, something deliberate, something patient, something that had claimed voices before me, that had whispered to a phone line to lure me closer, to prepare me for I didn't know what. And then I heard it again, not from the phone, not from the line, from behind me, the softest shuffle, the faintest brush of movement, footsteps, almost inaudible, circling the room. Slow, deliberate, not human, not natural. I spun, flashlight slicing through darkness, and saw nothing, but I felt it, patient, waiting, watching, approaching. I tried to leave. My legs felt like lead, my chest tight, my lungs burning, but the mausoleum seemed larger now. Corridors and walls I hadn't noticed before stretched beyond the beam of my flashlight. Shadows shifted in impossible ways. Every exit led deeper inside, and the whispers, my name, pressed into my mind, curling around my thoughts like smoke. I stumbled forward, tried to find an exit, trying to escape, but every step was mirrored by the softest echo, a patient imitation that didn't belong to any human being. The voice whispered again, slow and deliberate. You cannot leave, not yet. You must see, you must know. I sank against the wall, shaking, drenched in sweat, flashlight trembling. My mind reeled with what I had discovered. The calls, the voicemails, the midnight whispers. They weren't just warnings. They were invitations, lures, commands. And the mausoleum was alive. Or perhaps it never had been anything else. Perhaps it had always been waiting, patient, deliberate, calling out to the living, to the curious, to desperate. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes, hours. Time warped inside that place, stretched and twisted by its presence. The whispers continued. My name repeated again and again, alongside instructions I didn't fully understand. And then, finally, exhaustion, fear, and some instinct of self-preservation forced me to stagger out. Outside, the fog had thickened. The cemetery was quiet, deceptively calm, hiding the mausoleum's dark secret in the shadows. I stumbled back toward the patrol road, every instinct screaming at me, every nerve screaming for me to leave and never look back. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept seeing the carvings, hearing the whispers, feeling the patient weight of the mausoleum following me, wrapping itself around my mind. And I knew, deep down, that I had answered, that I had been chosen, that the calls, the voicemails, the whispers, they were only the beginning. The mausoleum waits, and I know I will return. I didn't sleep for days after the mausoleum. I couldn't. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the carvings, heard the whispers, felt the weight of that place pressing down on me like a hand made of fog and stone. I tried to tell myself it was over. I'd traced the calls. I'd faced the source. I had survived. But that was before it began again. It started with the phone, sitting on my desk, off the hook, exactly as it had been the night I found the mausoleum. The static hummed softly, almost imperceptibly. My name, carried through the line, whispered low and slow, curling into my ears like smoke. I picked up the receiver. My hand trembled. I could feel the pulse of something waiting, patient and deliberate, pressing into the cord, into the line, into me. The voice on the other end was familiar, not just familiar in tone, but in a way that made my chest tighten, made my stomach twist. It sounded like me, my own voice, distorted, stretched across the static. whispering the same warnings I had once received. My name, my own words. You will come, it hissed, patient and low, curling around my mind. You must. I froze. My mind raced, trying to understand. I remembered the weeks of calls, the voicemails, the footsteps, the mausoleum, everything I had experienced, the warnings, the whispers, the patient pull, had led here, had built to this. I felt a pull in my chest, stronger than ever, not physical, but mental, emotional, supernatural. Something was pulling me toward the line, toward the phone, toward the voice. And then it hit me. I wasn't calling anyone. I was the call. The realization struck like ice. My memories of the past weeks, the calls at midnight, the voicemails, the voices whisper my name, weren't just memories. They were recordings of myself. Each word I had heard had come from me, through the line, before I even understood. The calls weren't being made to me. They were being made by me, past and present colliding in a loop I could not escape. I dropped the receiver, trembling, heart hammering, mind screaming. But the phone rang again, and I knew, somehow, that if I didn't answer, the loop would break, but not in my favor. I lifted the receiver, hands shaking, voice caught in my throat. Hello. The line was silent. For a long moment, nothing. Then the whisper came. My name, drawn out, patient, certain, and then the instructions, same as before. Same words I had once heard on the voicemails, the calls. The night I faced the mausoleum, you cannot leave. You must listen. You must obey. You must call. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The office, the precinct, the world outside, all of it seemed to vanish, replaced by the thin, insistent pressure of the voice, the line, the loop I had entered. And then the images began, flickering, impossible. My own face on the other end of the line, pale, haunted, eyes wide with fear. My own hands, dialing, answering, whispering. The mausoleum, the gravestones, the fog. Every night I patrolled, every shadow I had seen, every whisper I had recorded, all of it connected, all of it feeding this loop. Feeding me. I tried to resist. I dropped the receiver again, stumbled back, tried to leave. But the room shifted, subtly at first, then more clearly. The walls stretched, the shadows twisted, the fog from the cemetery pressing in as though it had followed me. The desk, the phone, the recorder, they were all the same and yet not. Familiar and alien, like a reflection in a broken mirror. The line rang again. I knew, without thinking, that if I didn't answer, I would cease to exist in the sequence. But the thought of speaking into it terrified me. And yet, I picked it up. I had no choice. The voice whispered, my own voice. But it was different. It carried the weight of weeks I hadn't yet lived, of nights I hadn't yet survived, of calls I hadn't yet made. It warned, it threatened, it guided. It reminded me of every name, every warning, every step I had taken, every shadow I had seen in the fog. I realized then, with a sickening clarity, that I was trapped in the loop, that I had been trapped the moment I answered the first call, the first midnight ring, the first whisper of my name, every warning I had heard, every message I had recorded, every haunting I had endured. It was me, past me, future me, all of me, caught in a cycle I could not break. And then it spoke again, a command I couldn't ignore. Call them, warn them, or join them. I couldn't move. My hands shook, but they lifted the receiver anyway. My voice, trembling, barely audible, spoke the words I had once heard. Names, warnings, instructions. Every syllable carried the weight of dread, the inevitability of the supernatural force that had bound me to the line, to the calls, to the loop. The phone static hummed, a low, insistent tone that vibrated in my skull and my chest and my bones. The whispers of names, of danger, of inevitability, surrounded me, and I realized I wasn't alone. Not really. The loop had reached beyond the office, beyond the precinct, beyond the graveyard itself. Somewhere in the fog, in the shadows, in the mausoleum I had uncovered, the voices of past officers, past victims, past callers waited, feeding the cycle, waiting for the next link in the chain. I tried to hang up. The receiver wouldn't leave my hand. My fingers ached, numb and frozen, yet impossible to let go. My reflection in the glass of the office window stared back at me, pale, wide-eyed, identical to the caller I had become, identical to the voices I had heard. I was them, and they were me, and the line hummed with a terrible truth. I spoke again, my own voice distorted and stretched through the static. I whispered names. I issued warnings. I repeated instructions. I was the call. I was the loop. The realization filled me with a cold, crushing despair. There was no escape, only the line, only the whispers, only the inevitability of repeating the cycle for eternity. And then came the final sound. Not a whisper, not a static hum, but something else. A low, dragging thrum, like earth being moved beneath the mausoleum, beneath the graves, beneath the fog. I could feel it in my bones, in the floor beneath my boots, vibrating up through my spine, resonating with the voice in the line. The loop was alive. The line was alive. And I was alive, only to keep it moving. I realized then that I had become the caller, that my own fear, my own voice, my own memories had been captured, amplified, and sent forward to reach the next person, to guide them, to warn them, or to trap them as I had been trapped. The phone rang once more. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. My voice emerged automatically, rehearsed, inevitable, repeating the warnings I had once received. You will hear us. You will answer. You will come. You cannot leave. We are here. We are waiting. We are patient. You will join us. The echoes carried through the office, through the fog outside, through the graveyard, through the mausoleum. My voice, stretched across time and space, reached the next link in the chain, the next officer, the next victim, just as mine had reached me. I tried to resist, tried to fight the inevitability, but my body moved on its own. My mouth spoke words I didn't choose. My hands dialed numbers I had never seen. And I knew then, with a bone-deep certainty, that this would never end. Not for me, not for the next person, not for anyone. The loop would continue. The line would ring again. The whispers would echo. And somewhere in the shadows, in the fog, in the weight pressing to the mausoleum and the graveyard, I could feel the patience of it all. Waiting, watching, guiding, feeding. The line had chosen me, and now I had chosen in return. I am the call. I am the warning. I am the loop, and it waits. I never believed in ghosts or spirits. Not really. I thought the stories about the graveyard were just that, stories. Folklore whispered from one officer to the next to scare rookies. But the night I got lost in that fog, I realized how wrong I was. I realized how little I understood the quiet, the dark, the spaces between life and death. It started like any other graveyard shift. I had walked the same paths hundreds of times, flashlight in hand, boots crunching over gravel, mist curling over the graves. The night was calm at first, the air cool, the wind rustling dead leaves. But as the clock crept past midnight, the fog rolled in, not slowly, not gradually, but suddenly, thick white, curling tendrils that swallowed the gravestones and the oak trees, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Fog rises and falls. It shifts with the wind. I tried to stay calm, to remind myself of that. I took careful steps along the main path, flashlight cutting arcs through the white nothingness. But no matter how carefully I walked, the fog seemed to move faster, spreading before me, twisting around the gravestones, curling under my boots like a living thing. I should have turned back. I should have called for backup. But there was something, I don't know what, that made me keep moving. Something patient and cold that pulled me forward, deeper into the fog, past the gravestones, past the roads I knew, past the trees that should have marked familiar boundaries. It felt as if the mist had its own will, pressing me toward a place I didn't want to see. Minutes passed, or hours, I couldn't tell. Time seemed irrelevant in that fog. The path I thought I knew stretched endlessly, and each gravestone I passed looked the same as the last, weathered, leaning, names blurred and unrecognizable. I began to realize something terrifying. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know which direction led back to the office, to the patrol car, to safety. Every turn I took, every step forward, seemed to fold back on itself. The silence was worse than anything I could have imagined. No birds, no wind, not even the distant hum of the city beyond the cemetery. Just the soft whisper of the fog brushing against gravestones and trees. My footsteps sounded too loud, echoing unnaturally in the still air. And then I noticed something else. The fog wasn't uniform. It shifted around me, forming shapes, shadows, almost like figures moving in the distance, just at the edge of sight. I stopped, heart hammering, squinted into the whiteness. Nothing, only the mist, curling and curling, as if alive, as if watching. I called out, voice cracking, "Hello? Anyone?" My words disappeared instantly, swallowed by the fog. No echo, no response, nothing. I kept walking, though every instinct screamed to turn back. The fog pressed against me now, curling over my shoulders, clinging to my uniform, brushing against my face like a living hand. I felt it move with intent. Every step I took was guided, or perhaps restrained, by the fog itself. It was leading me somewhere, or keeping me from leaving. I couldn't tell which. I passed a row of gravestones I didn't recognize. Some names were old, dates decades past. Some were recent, fresh, barely weathered. I felt a chill pass through me as I read one, a name I recognized, one of the missing officers, someone who had disappeared months ago during a night shift like this. My breath caught. I shook my head. This had to be a trick of the light, a coincidence, but the fog made it impossible to think clearly. The mist thickened. My flashlight barely penetrated a few feet ahead. Shapes appeared and disappeared in the white, always at the edge of vision, never fully seen. I felt eyes on me, but when I turned, nothing was there. The graveyard had grown larger, or I had grown smaller, shrinking beneath the weight of the fog. It was impossible to know. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was wading through water, though the ground beneath my boots was solid. And then I heard it, a sound faint at first, barely distinguishable from the whisper of the fog. Footsteps, not my own, though, not human. Slow, deliberate, patient, following me, circling me. I froze, breath trembling in my chest, trying to locate the source. But the fog hid everything. I couldn't see it, couldn't anticipate it, could only feel it moving, waiting, pressing closer. I ran, tried to follow what I thought was a path back, but the fog shifted again, closing off the route, opening another. Shadows loomed and dissolved, gravestones twisting and bending in ways they shouldn't. I stumbled over roots, over uneven soil, heart hammering, lungs burning. Every step I took was mirrored by something I couldn't see, a presence moving to the fog, patient, waiting, deliberate. Panic rose. My rational mind tried to assert itself. "It's just fog," I told myself. "Just fog. You know these grounds. You can find your way." But the fog had other plans. The gravestones I recognized seemed to move, rearranging themselves, twisting subtly, like the cemetery itself had grown and reshaped while I wasn't looking. I shouted for help. My voice cracked, echoing, swallowed. Fading. Silence answered. I ran blindly, tripping over a root, sliding in mud. I caught myself on a gravestone, cold and slick under my hands. The fog pressed against me, curling under my arms, brushing my neck like a living thing. My heart hammered, my thoughts scattered. I could feel it in my chest, my spine, in the soles of my boots. Something in the fog had intent, purpose, and patience. I thought I saw a light ahead, dim, flickering. Hope surged. I ran toward it, stumbling, tripping, almost falling. But the light disappeared as I approached, swallowed by the fog, leaving me alone again. I realized then that the fog wasn't random. It was guiding me, shaping my path, controlling my perception. It was alive, or at least it behaved as if it were. Hours or minutes, I cannot tell, passed. My flashlight flickered, sputtered, and finally dimmed. The darkness of the fog became total. My ears rang. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. And then, just before the terror overwhelmed me, I stumbled into a clearing. Not a clearing I recognized, not a path I had walked before, but a small, empty space between gravestones, calm and still. The fog lifted just enough to see the edge of the woods. I collapsed, gasping, trembling, convinced I had found the edge of a nightmare. The mist swirled around me, curling in tendrils as if sighing, disappointed that I had reached this point. I glanced back into the fog. It stretched endlessly, swallowing the rows of graves, hiding shadows that moved just beyond my vision. It seemed to pulse as though alive, as though aware of me. I didn't move for a long time. I couldn't. My mind reeled, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I had walked familiar grounds, yet I had been lost in a fog that defied all logic, all reason, all sense of reality. Something had guided me, played with me, pressed against me, and I had survived only by chance, or by whatever mercy it granted. When I finally dragged myself back to Patrol Road, dawn was breaking. Light spilled across the cemetery, scattering the mist, revealing the paths, the gravestones, the trees I had known for weeks. And yet, the memory of the fog lingered, thicker than the morning air. I knew, even as I walked back to the office, that it had not been natural, that it had not been ordinary, that something had been patient, deliberate, waiting for me to wander too far, to falter, to notice. I didn't sleep that day. Couldn't. I kept imagining the mist curling around me, pressing against my chest, pulling me deeper into the cemetery, hiding paths I had once known, hiding the shadows that moved just out of reach. I knew that night would come again. That fog would return, patient, waiting, and I would be there, walking its path, lost in its will, powerless against it. The fog has a memory. The fog has intent. And the fog knows me now. The fog had not lifted when my next shift began. If anything, it was thicker than before, curling over graves like a living thing, wrapping the cemetery in a white silence that made the night feel endless. I had hoped my first encounter was a fluke, some trick of exhaustion and imagination, but standing at the edge of the patrol path, flashlight in hand, I knew better. It started slowly, shapes forming in the mist, just beyond the beam of my light. I squinted, trying to make sense of them. Shadows, I told myself. Trees and gravestones distorted by fog. Yet my stomach tightened as I realized the shapes were not moving like trees or gravestones. They were upright, human-shaped, still, watching. I froze, heart hammering. Each step I took forward, the shapes seemed to shift slightly, as if they were breathing, moving imperceptibly, circling me. My flashlight trembled in my hands. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The fog swallowed it instantly. Silence, heavy and patient, pressed against me. Then I saw them clearly. Faces, pale, wet-looking, though the fog carried no moisture. Eyes wide, unblinking, staring directly at me. No expression, just a raw, impossible stillness of something not quite alive. They were not far, but not close either. Impossible to measure distance in that white haze. I blinked. They were closer. Not by movement I could see, but by instinct I could feel. My chest tightened. The shapes, the faces, were advancing. Every step I took, they seemed to come nearer, shifting in the fog. Yet the fog itself remained unmoving. It was as if the mist carried them forward, pulling them, pressing them toward me. I tried to rationalize. Shadows, my mind playing tricks, my heart racing. I had been walking these paths long enough to know the cemetery well. There was nothing here but gravestones, trees, fog. Yet I knew deep down that what I saw was real, or as real as anything could be in a fog's impossible embrace. I raised my flashlight higher, trying to illuminate them. The beam cut through the mist, revealing faces frozen in impossible expressions. Some screaming silently, some wide-eyed, some pressed flat against nothing at all, staring directly into me. I could feel their gaze pressing against my skull, crawling into my thoughts, invading memory. I stumbled backward, boots slipping on damp soil. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, brushing against my arms like cold fingers. The faces grew closer, yet there was no sound. No footsteps, no whispers, no breathing. Just the presence of eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on me. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my legs refused. The fog pressed like weight, heavier than air, heavier than stone. Every step I tried to take was resisted, slowed, turned aside by some invisible force. And still, the faces advanced, circling me in patient, impossible arcs. I thought of the officers who had disappeared here before me, the stories whispered in the precinct, dismissed by everyone but the rookies. I had laughed at those stories once. I had called them cautionary tales, meant to scare newcomers. But now, under the unblinking gaze of those faces, I understood. Those warnings had not been lies. They had been memories. Warnings from those trapped. Just like me, I tried to focus on something else. Anything else. The gravel under my boots, the nearest gravestone, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the fog. But the faces didn't allow it. They moved not with legs, not with feet, but with intent. The fog carried them closer, pressing against me, around me, until I could feel their presence brushing my skin. Cold, insistent, patient. I stumbled again, arms flailing, flashlight swinging, cutting arcs through the fog. Faces appeared wherever the light landed, shifting, bending, always just beyond the reach of clarity. Their eyes followed me, penetrating me, pressing against memories I didn't want to recall, fears I hadn't faced. I felt small, fragile, consumed by their gaze. A sound reached me then, faint, almost imperceptible at first. Breathing? Whispering? No, neither. Something else. The fog seemed to hum, a low vibration that rattled in my bones. The faces responded, tilting, stretching, their empty mouths forming silent shapes, as though speaking to the vibration itself. I realized then that the fog was alive, that the faces were alive, or had once been alive, and that both of them were aware of me. I turned, trying to escape, but the paths I knew had vanished. Gravestones rearranged themselves, trees twisted, shadows lengthened in impossible directions. The fog guided me, herded me, forced me toward a destination I could not see, and the faces followed, patient and silent, close in the distance with every step I tried to take. Panic rose, thick and choking. My mind screamed at me to run, to leave, to fight, but the fog laughed in silence, pressing, curling, twisting, reshaping the cemetery into a labyrinth of impossible angles. The faces advanced steadily, their eyes burning into my soul. I realized then that escape was irrelevant. Distance had no meaning here. The fog made the rules. I stumbled into a small clearing, hoping for a moment's reprieve, some open space where I could gather my thoughts. But the fog filled it instantly. Faces appeared on all sides, hundreds of them, eyes wide and unblinking, pressed against nothing, hovering, waiting. And then one face moved closer, tilting its head, staring directly at me. Familiar, terrifyingly familiar. I realized with a jolt that I knew that face, not personally, but in memory, in subconscious recognition. One of the missing officers, staring at me as if to say, "You're next." The fog thickened, curling around me like a cage, and the other faces leaned forward, drawn by the same motion, until I was around it. I fell to my knees, hands gripping the damp soil. My chest heaved. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but leave where? The fog had no edges. The faces had no limits. They pressed closer, watching, waiting, patient and deliberate. And then they whispered, not words I could understand, but something primal, incomprehensible. A sound like 1,000 voices breathing at once, curling around my mind, pressing into memories I hadn't yet recalled, fears I had buried. My head spun. The fog vibrated with the weight of their presence. I forced myself to my feet, stumbling backward, flashlight swinging wildly. Faces appeared wherever the beam fell, bending, shifting, impossible in every way, yet undeniably real. The air was thick, heavy, alive with the intent of something older than the graveyard, older than the night itself. I ran, tried to follow a path I thought I recognized, but the fog moved with me, curling around my legs, pressing against my back, whispering through every nerve, every thought, every heartbeat. The faces multiplied, circling me, pressing in closer, patient and deliberate. I don't remember how long I ran. Minutes? Hours? Time had no meaning. The fog shaped the world. The faces shaped my mind. And I realized with a cold, sinking certainty that the night would never end, that the fog and the faces were patient enough to wait me out, to wear me down, to claim me if I faltered. I stumbled into another clearing, small and oddly familiar. My flashlight illuminated gravestones I had walked past hundreds of times, but different, wrong. Names I knew, dates I recognized, but altered, twisted, impossible. And then I saw a face, right at the edge of the beam, staring, wide-eyed, unblinking, silent, waiting. I collapsed to my knees, tears running down my face. My chest heaved. Every rational thought, every hope, every memory of safety vanished. The fog pressed closer, curling around my arms, my legs, my shoulders, and the faces, hundreds of them now, all of them, leaned forward, watching, patient, deliberate. I whispered into the mist a single, desperate plea. Please go away. The fog did not respond. The faces did not move. They only waited. And I realized then that I would walk this path again. That the fog, patient and eternal, would wait for me night after night. That the faces, silent and unblinking, would always watch. That the cemetery, alive with mist and memory, had claimed me in a way I could never escape. I don't know how I got out. I only know that when I stumbled back to the patrol road, gasping, shaking, the fog lifted slightly, curling away as though satisfied. But I knew it would return. Always. Patient. Waiting. And the faces would be there too, just beyond the edge of vision. Always following, always watching. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I haven't slept properly since. I keep seeing them in the mist. Watching. Waiting. And I know the next time I walk the cemetery paths, they will be closer, patient, deliberate, inevitable. The fog has memory. The faces have intent. And I am part of both now. The fog had grown thicker, heavier, the night stretching endlessly before me. Each shift I walked the cemetery, and each time it seemed to change. Paths I had memorized for weeks warped into impossibilities. Rows of gravestones that had once lined straight avenues now twisted at impossible angles. Trees that had been distant landmarks loomed nearby, blocking the way forward. I stopped trying to understand it rationally. The cemetery was no longer a place I could navigate. It had become a labyrinth, alive and aware. I had begun my patrol at the usual entry point, expecting familiar gravel underfoot and the comforting boundaries of the paths I knew. But within minutes, I realized something was wrong. The fog pressed against me, curling around my boots, and the rows of gravestones ahead shifted subtly. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe my eyes played tricks in the dim light. But the moment I tried to turn, a row I had just passed seemed to stretch before me, blocking the path I had thought was open. I stopped, flashlight trembling in my hands. The air was thick, cold, and heavy, and I could hear the soft crunch of my boots on gravel, my own steps echoing strangely, as if mirrored by someone else walking just behind me. I turned, expecting to see another officer. Nothing, only the fog, shifting in subtle currents, curling like fingers around gravestones, around me. I tried to retrace my steps. I took a left where I remembered taking a right. The path seemed correct at first, until the gravestones began to warp, their straight lines bending, shifting, forming impossible angles. Trees I had memorized as far boundaries now towered close, blocking any exit. I realized with a sickening clarity that I was trapped, not in a physical maze, but in one shaped by something patient and deliberate. The cemetery had become a labyrinth, alive and aware. I called out, voice cracking. "Anyone there?" Silence answered. Only the fog whispered back, curling against my uniform, brushing my face like a living thing. The labyrinth seemed to respond to my voice, shifting, twisting, rearranging itself. Every step I took forward made the paths behind me disappear, the way I had come vanishing into the mist. I tried to stay calm, to use the patterns I had memorized, But the labyrinth defied all logic. Gravestones rearranged themselves. Rows I had walked past dozens of times were suddenly elsewhere, forming dead ends, impossible turns, and looping paths that led me back to where I had started. I could feel the fog pressing closer with each failed attempt to find an exit, patient and insistent, as if it knew I was lost and wanted me to understand something. And then I noticed the faces, not floating in the mist this time, not pale and ghostly like before, but etched into the gravestones themselves, eyes carved deep into marble, staring at me from impossible angles, mouths frozen in silent expressions of terror and warning. I froze, heart hammering. Each time I moved, the faces seemed to shift, tilting, twisting to follow me. I realized then that the labyrinth was not only physical, it was psychological. It knew my fear. It responded to it. I tried to force myself forward to keep moving, but the fog seemed thicker in some areas, curling around my legs, holding me back, slowing me. Every step I took felt heavier. Every turn led to another dead end. And with each failure, the faces on the gravestone seemed to multiply, tilting their heads closer, leaning in, watching. I stumbled, trying to find a familiar marker, a tree or a stone I had memorized. But every landmark I thought I recognized was gone or altered. I caught a glimpse of a gravestone with my own name carved on it, faint and twisted, as if the cemetery were rewriting reality to include me. Panic rose in my chest. My lungs burned. My flashlight beam shook, casting long, impossible shadows that seemed to reach for me. The labyrinth was not silent. The fog carried whispers, faint, unintelligible at first, but growing clearer with every turn. Names. My name. Others I recognized. Officers who had disappeared in the past months. Their voices woven into the labyrinth itself. Warning and guiding and laughing all at once. I realized then that I was not the first to be trapped. I would not be the last. The labyrinth consumed anyone who wandered too far. Anyone who fell for its patience and its pull. I ran, or tried to. My boots sank into soft earth that had not been there moments before. Paths looped endlessly, gravestones shifting just beyond the reach of my flashlight. The fog moved with me, curling around my arms, my legs, my chest. It was alive, patient, deliberate. The labyrinth itself was aware of me, shaping my movements, anticipating my fear, responding to my instinct to flee. Every instinct told me to scream. I wanted to shout, to call for help, to break the silence. But no voice came out. The labyrinth swallowed it instantly, and then the whispering began. Names, warnings, indistinct phrases that pressed against my mind like cold water. I realized with sinking dread that I had become part of the labyrinth itself. My fear, my panic, my footsteps, they all fed it, kept it alive, guided it. The fog shifted again. I caught a glimpse of movement ahead. Not human, not quite. Something tall and indistinct, moving slowly between gravestones, observing. I tried to shine my flashlight on it, but the beam bent in the fog, splitting into impossible angles, never illuminating more than a fraction of the shape. And yet, I felt its presence, patient, deliberate, waiting for me to falter. I stumbled into a small clearing. Or at least, I thought it was a clearing. The gravestones here were arranged in a circle, impossibly precise, all facing inward. At the center, a single stone stood taller than the rest. My flashlight beam landed on it, and I froze. The stone was etched with names, familiar names, names of officers, missing officers, names I had heard whispered in dispatch logs. And then I saw one that made my stomach drop. My own. I pressed my hands to the cold marble, heart hammering, mind reeling. The labyrinth had claimed me, not yet fully, but had marked me, etched me into its design, made me a part of it. I understood then that it was not merely a trap of paths and fog. It was alive, patient, deliberate. It reshaped reality itself to ensnare anyone who came too close, anyone who noticed, anyone who feared. The whispers grew louder, circling me. Not words, not sentences, but sound that pressed against memory. Memory I did not want to recall, fears I had buried, instincts I had ignored. I stumbled back, falling into the soft earth, trembling. The fog thickened, curling around me, Pressing in and the gravestones shifted. Paths I had tried to follow disappeared. The labyrinth had reformed around me. I tried to leave, to retrace my steps, but every familiar path had vanished. The gravestones rearranged themselves, looping and folding impossibly. I ran in circles, heart hammering, lungs burning, flashlight beams slicing arcs through the white void. And still, the labyrinth pressed in, patient and deliberate. The fog carried faces, whispers, and shapes that were not entirely human, following me, circling me, always at the edge of vision. I realized then that the labyrinth was not meant to be solved. It was meant to trap, to consume, to rewrite the paths of anyone foolish enough to wander too far, to notice too much, to fear too deeply. And I understood that it would never release me. Not truly. I might stumble into patrol roads someday, exhausted and terrified, but the labyrinth would remain, waiting for the next person, patient, deliberate, eternal. I sank to my knees in the fog, hands pressed against the damp soil. The whispers circled me, pressing into my mind. Faces appeared at the edges of my vision, ghostly and unblinking, etched into gravestones, floating just beyond the beam of my flashlight. They pressed closer with every movement, every thought, every heartbeat. And then I heard it, a soft, deliberate sound, a shuffle that did not belong to any living being. Something moving in the fog, unseen but present, circling me, patient, aware. I couldn't see it, but I felt it, pressing, waiting, guiding. And I understood with sickening clarity that I was already part of the labyrinth now, bound to it, feeding it, shaping it as it shaped me. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes? Hours? Time no longer mattered. The fog, the faces, the shifting paths. They had no need for time. They only needed me to notice, to fear, to move. And I had every instinct, every decision. Every faltering step had bound me more tightly to the labyrinth. When I finally stumbled into the faint light of the patrol road, the fog thinned slightly, revealing familiar markers, familiar trees, familiar gravestones. But I knew it was a trick. The labyrinth never lets go. It waits, patient, deliberate, shifting, always reshaping, always aware. I returned to the precinct, exhausted and trembling. My mind raced with every impossible turn, every shifting gravestone, every whisper, every unblinking face. And I knew that tonight would come again, that the labyrinth would wait for me, patient and deliberate, ready to claim me further, to reshape the paths, to bend the cemetery around me once more. The cemetery is memory. The labyrinth has intent, and I am part of it now. The next night, I knew I would return. I didn't want to, but something inside me, the part of me that had been marked by the fog, that had walked the cemetery's shifting paths, pulled me back. I told myself it was duty, that as an officer I had to patrol, to protect, to survive. But deep down, I knew it was something else entirely. The fog had left a memory inside me, a hunger, and it wanted me to feed it. I arrived at the cemetery before midnight, flashlight in hand, uniform damp with anticipation and sweat. The air was heavier than usual, charged, as if waiting. I paused at the edge of the patrol road, looking out at the gravestones barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. The mist curled at their bases like fingers, creeping, reaching, alive. I could feel it watching me, patient and deliberate. And I knew, the moment I stepped into it, that it would not let me leave. I took a careful step forward. The fog pressed closer, curling around my boots, cold and damp against my skin. Each step into its embrace felt heavier, like walking through water that pulled downward with intent. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands, my racing heart. The fog seemed to sense my fear, wrapping tighter, moving faster, enclosing me, pressing me further from the road, further from safety. It began slowly, as it always does, shapes forming at the edges of vision, just beyond the flashlight beam, shadows moving between gravestones, bending and twisting in ways that defied physics. I reminded myself, shadows can't harm you, shadows can't follow you, shadows aren't alive. But these were different. They weren't shadows. They were extensions of the fog itself, writhing, patient, deliberate, pushing me towards something I could not see, I called out, voice barely audible. Hello? Anyone here? My words disappeared instantly, swallowed by the thick, wet air. Silence answered. Only the curling fog pressed closer, brushing against my face, my shoulders, as if tasting my fear. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I could feel it thinking, waiting, hungry. I tried to move, to navigate paths I thought I knew, but the fog shifted with each step. Gravestones I had passed hundreds of times now blocked my way. Trees moved impossibly, rearranged themselves into new patterns. Every turn led to a dead end. Every step forward folded back on itself. The cemetery had become a labyrinth again, but this time more deliberate, more aware. It wanted me trapped, and I realized then with cold, sinking certainty. The fog was alive. Not like a cloud, not like mist. It was thinking, breathing, feeding. It wanted something from me. It wanted me. It wanted to consume me. I heard voices, faint, distant, echoing from within the fog. Other officers, past officers, survivors who had walked these paths before me. Their voices called my name, whispered warnings, but twisted into pleas that sounded like laughter. My head spun. I could not tell if the voices were my mind or in the mist itself. They overlapped, a chorus of terror and despair. Then the screaming began. Not far, not close, but somewhere in the distance, echoing through the fog. The sound of agony, raw and unfiltered, reverberating through the damp air. My stomach turned. My knees buckled. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to get out. But there was no path, no road, no escape. The fog pressed tighter, patient and deliberate, herding me further from safety. I stumbled over roots, over uneven soil, my flashlight beam cutting frantic arcs through the mist. And I saw them, faces, hundreds of them, pressed against gravestones, floating just beyond the light. Wide-eyed, mouth frozen in screams that never ended, unblinking eyes that followed me, patient and deliberate. The faces were not alive, yet they were aware. They were the fog's memory, its hunger made visible, warning me, teasing me, claiming me piece by piece. I tried to call out again, to find someone, anyone. My voice cracked and failed. The fog swallowed it instantly. The screams echoed, louder now, closer, twisting around my mind like cold hands pulling at my thoughts. I realized I was alone. No one would come. The fog had claimed the cemetery, and now it was claiming me. I ran, or I tried. The paths looped endlessly, gravestones shifting, curling, rearranging themselves in impossible patterns. Every step forward led me back to where I had started, to the same gravestones, the same shadows, the same screaming faces. I could feel it pressing against my chest, my back, wrapping around my legs, guiding my movements, feeding on my panic. I collapsed on the damp soil, hands clutching my knees. My flashlight flickered and died. Total darkness pressed in, alive, patient, deliberate, and the fog whispered. Names, warnings, threats, promises I could not understand. It spoke directly to my mind, pressing against memory, fear, regret. I had no choice. I was already part of it. Hours or minutes, I cannot tell, passed. I staggered forward, guided by instinct and terror. The fog thinned slightly, revealing gravestones with names I recognized. Missing officers, names scratched into stone, some fresh, some decades old. I knew now that they were not merely memorials. They were warnings, markers, signs of what the fog had done and what it would do to me. I saw a movement ahead, flickers of shadow and shape between gravestones. Figures, tall, indistinct, patient. I tried to shine my flashlight on them, but the beam bent, split, revealed nothing more than impossible silhouettes. They didn't move like living beings. They glided, drifting closer, but without sound, and I felt them pressing against me, as if the fog itself carried them, folding them into my path. Screams echoed again, closer this time, not human entirely, yet somehow painfully familiar. The fog thrummed with sound, vibrating against my chest, against my skull, pressing into my mind. I realized that it fed on fear, on panic, on despair, and I had plenty to give. I stumbled into another clearing, or at least I thought it was a clearing. Gravestones formed a circle, impossibly perfect, all facing inward. The fog swirled around me, curling like fingers, pressing, guiding. I felt eyes on my back, on my shoulders, everywhere at once. And then I saw it. A gravestone taller than the rest, central, illuminated faintly by some inner light the fog seemed to carry. I approached, trembling. My hands shook as I traced the carvings on the stone. Names. Hundreds of names. Past officers. Missing officers. And then one that stopped my breath. My own. Freshly etched, letters deep and precise, as though the fog itself had carved it while I slept. I understood with perfect clarity that I was claimed. I was never leaving. Not really. The fog had me. The voices rose again, screaming and whispering at once. I could feel the fog curling around my neck, my chest, tightening, pressing. It wanted me to join them, to add my fear, my name, my essence to the mass of memories it carried. And I knew I could not resist. I could only scream, only try, only panic, and in doing so, feed it further. I fell to the ground, hands covered my face, shaking, crying. The fog pressed in. Faces appeared at the edges of my vision, ghostly, twisted, patient, and deliberate. Some I recognized. Officers who had vanished months ago. Some I did not recognize. All of them trapped, feeding the fog, marking the labyrinth, warning the next fool who wandered too far. I screamed again, raw and primal. And in that moment, I felt the fog tighten like a vice. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat throbbed painfully. And then I understood the truth. There would be no escape. Not for me. Not for anyone. The cemetery belonged to it now. The fog had memory. The fog had intent. And I was just another name it would carry. Time became meaningless. Screams echoed in loops. Faces pressed closer. Whispers pressed deeper into my mind. I staggered forward blindly. The fog guiding me, reshaping the cemetery, shaping reality itself to keep me trapped. I realized then that survival was irrelevant. Resistance was irrelevant. I was a part of it now. When I finally stumbled back toward the patrol road, it was truly the patrol road. The fog thinned slightly, curling back like a predator retreating just enough to let its prey see escape. But I knew better. I had seen it before. It waits. Patient. Deliberate. Eternal. The cemetery. The fog. The labyrinth. It had claimed me. And it would claim others. I returned to the precinct. Exhausted. Trembling. My mind fractured by fear. Logs recorded my screams. My calls for help. My scattered footsteps. And somewhere in those logs, I heard them. The echoes of other officers, past and present, trapped in the fog, in the labyrinth, in its patient, deliberate hunger. I did not sleep. Could not. The fog waits. Always. Patient. Deliberate. Hungry for souls. And I know, in the depths of my mind, that my name is etched now, fresh and permanent, on the central stone. I will never leave. I am part of it. And the screams, the echoes of fog, they will always follow. The fog has memory. It has hunger. It has claimed me. And it will never let me go. I had only been on the force a few months when the report started. Missing bodies. Stolen from the morgue at the edge of town, just beyond the cemetery. At first, we thought it was some prank, a security lapse, maybe even careless paperwork. But the logs didn't lie. Corpses that had been accounted for vanished overnight, as if they had never existed. I remember the first time I saw the morgue at night. It's an unremarkable building, gray concrete, flickering fluorescent lights, quiet except for the hum of refrigeration units. But there's something about it that makes you uneasy. Like the walls themselves remember the bodies they hold. The night I walked the perimeter alone, flashlight in hand, I could feel it. The cold air carried more than chill. It carried a presence. The first missing body was discovered by a janitor the next morning. He swore he had locked the cooler door the night before, and the logs confirmed it. Yet when the coroner came in, the slab was empty. No sign of forced entry. No fingerprints. No disturbance except for the body itself gone. The officers on duty whispered about it. Some joke about grave robbers or morbid pranksters. But the unease was real. We all felt it. I had to see it for myself. I checked the logs, examined the storage units, walked the corridors where the dead lay silent and cold. Everything was in order, or at least it appeared to be. The night was quiet, too quiet. I kept thinking I would hear the hum of refrigeration, but sometimes it vanished, leaving a strange, hollow silence. It was then I noticed the faint marks on the floor. Not footprints, exactly, more like scuffs, as if something heavy had been dragged. They led from the cooler to the back exit, and then they stopped, just ended. No sign of where the body went. No sign of a person or vehicle. Nothing. I reported my findings to the captain, expecting some rational explanation, but even he looked uneasy. His hands trembled slightly when he held reports, and his voice dropped when he spoke. "We've never had anything like this," he said. "Someone or something is taking the bodies before anyone can see, and no one can explain it." The next few nights, I stayed late at the morgue, patrolling the corridors, checking the cooler doors, listening. At first, nothing happened. Then came the sounds. A dragging sound at first, faint, almost imperceptible, like metal on tile. I would freeze, straining to hear, flashlight trembling in my hands. The sound stopped when I moved toward it. I thought it was my imagination, until the sound came again, closer, faster, following my footsteps. I started seeing shapes, shadows moving just beyond the reach of the light, twisting in corners, slipping behind doors. I convinced myself it was fatigue, paranoia, the mind playing tricks in the quiet of the night. But one night, as I checked the logs again, I saw a shape standing at the end of the hall. It wasn't human, not exactly, yet it had a form, tall, dark, featureless, and still. I froze. My flashlight flickered, and when it steadied, the shape was gone. But I could feel it, watching, patient, deliberate. The bodies kept disappearing. Each time, the same pattern. No alarms, no forced entry, no evidence. Just gone. And then the whispers started. At first, I heard them faintly when I walked the halls alone. A soft, indistinct murmur, like someone calling a name. Then clearer, fragments of words, half sentences, warnings that made no sense. Names I recognized. Officers, morgue staff, people who had nothing to do with the missing bodies. And then, sometimes my own name. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty slabs, the missing corpses, shadows standing at the end of the hall. I saw their eyes, empty, unblinking, pressing into my mind, judging, waiting. And I knew the morgue was no longer a place of storage. It was a threshold, somewhere between life and death, a place where the line was thin, and whatever it claimed those bodies could reach across it. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a grave robber ring, organized, careful, and relentless. But that didn't explain the dragging sound that followed me, the shapes, the whispers that called from empty corners. That didn't explain how the bodies vanished without a trace, how the cameras showed nothing, how every security check came back normal. I began to dread each shift, each step into corridors where the dead were supposed to be safe. One night, I found a trail, not on the floor, but in the air itself, or maybe in the space around me. A coldness that brushed my skin, pressing, curling like fingers. I followed it, flashlight trembling. It led me past the coolers, past the empty slabs, to the back exit of the morgue. The door was slightly ajar, though I had checked it. The night air outside smelled wrong. Damp, earthy, metallic. I stepped through cautiously. The cemetery lay beyond. Fog curled over the gravestones, thick and white, shifting like smoke in a breeze that didn't exist. And then I understood. The bodies weren't stolen by a person or by anything human. They were being delivered here to the graves, but not laid to rest. The fog moved around them, lifting them, placing them, guiding them like a river carrying objects downstream. I stumbled back, heart racing. My flashlight illuminated a slab in the middle of the mist, and I swear I saw a figure, half-formed, faceless, standing beside it, waiting. I ran back inside the morgue, slammed the door, and locked it. My chest heaved. I thought I could rationalize it again, deny what I had seen. But the whispering started inside the room itself, soft at first and then rising. Names, warnings, half sentences that pressed into my mind, twisting thoughts I didn't want to consider. The bodies were gone again, and I hadn't left the building. The logs reflected it all. Missing bodies, reports of dragging sounds, empty coolers, whispered names. Other officers whispered among themselves, some in hushed tones, some refusing to speak at all. No one wanted to be alone in the morgue at night, and I understood why. Whatever took the bodies, whatever moved in the fog, it wasn't human. It was patient, deliberate, and it waited. Always. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the slabs, the missing corpses, the half-formed shadows standing at the edge of the light. My reflection in the security camera feed seemed wrong, distorted, pale, as though the morgue itself had taken a part of me. I started leaving small notes, reminders to myself, logs that might survive if I didn't. I tried to tell someone to ask for backup, to have a team stay the night. But no one stayed. People refused. They made excuses, citing family, exhaustion, bureaucracy. I understood. The fear was contagious. It wasn't just the missing bodies. It was what was taking them. It was a patient, deliberate presence that moved between the slabs, the fog, and the graves beyond. And it was hungry. I know now that I will return. I have to. Not for duty, not for honor, but because the morgue calls me. The fog calls me. The missing bodies call me. I see them when I close my eyes, hear their names whispered when I'm alone, and I know that if I stay away too long, the shadows will come for me. I write this as a warning, though I doubt it will be read in time. The bodies vanish without trace. The morgue is no longer safe. The fog beyond waits. And I know, deep in my bones, that the missing are not gone. They are elsewhere, moving in the white mist, patient and deliberate, waiting to pull in the next soul. And tonight, I will walk the halls again. I will check the coolers. I will listen for the dragging, for the whispers, for the half-formed shadows. Because if I don't, I know what happens. The morgue will take me too, and no one will find my body. Only the logs will show my absence, silent and unblinking, a record of what cannot be explained. The bodies are missing. The fog is alive, and I fear that it will never stop. I don't think I'll ever forget that night. The one where we found them, the skeletons, half reassembled, scattered across the cemetery, as though some unseen hand had toyed with them like a cruel puppeteer. It started with routine patrol, one I had walked dozens of times. Yet that night it felt wrong from the first step. The fog was heavier than usual, curling between gravestones, thick and white, pressing against our ankles, our knees, our chests. I could barely see my partner, Thompson, a few feet ahead. His flashlight beam flickered and trembled in the mist, cutting through the darkness in short, hesitant arcs. I tried to call out, but my voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the fog. He turned at my faint shout, eyes wide, pale in the dim light. "You feel that?" he whispered. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what exactly I was agreeing to. At first, it was just shadows, shapes moving behind gravestones, vanishing the moment we tried to focus on them. Nothing we could identify, nothing that made sense. Then, the first skeleton appeared. It was lying across a freshly overturned grave, half buried in soil, bones splayed at impossible angles. I froze. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Thompson gasped behind me. "Jesus," he muttered. I wanted to look away, to convince myself it was a prank, some elaborate Halloween stunt. But it wasn't. The bones were real, clean, dry, stripped of flesh, yet arranged with eerie precision, like someone or something had taken time to piece them together, only to abandon the effort. We moved closer, careful, almost reverent. The mist seemed to part for us, curling around gravestones as we walked. I noticed the smell first, earthy, metallic, the faintest trace of decay, not strong, not overpowering, but enough to make my stomach turn. I swallowed hard. The skeleton wasn't alone. More lay scattered around the grave, on other plots, half reassembled, twisted, some missing skulls, others missing limbs. "Who?" Thompson began, then stopped. No one could answer. No living soul could have done this. There was no sign of a person moving between plots. No footprints in the damp earth except our own. The fog was unnaturally still, thick and pressing, almost sentient in its patience, and I realized with a cold certainty that we were being watched. I raised my flashlight higher, scanning the graves. The mist shifted in response, curling tighter around certain stones, leaving others almost clear. And then I saw them, shadows, multiple, featureless, drifting between gravestones, not running, not walking, just gliding, patient, deliberate. I could feel their eyes on us, though they had no faces, and I understood deep in my bones that they had done this. I stepped closer to a skeleton that had been arranged to appear almost human, one arm resting across the chest, fingers curled. Its skull had been placed carefully atop the spine, but tilted slightly, like it was watching me. I could hear the faintest whisper, not audible to Thompson, but in my mind pressing, insistent. Don't touch me. Don't move me. Don't look. My hands trembled. I wanted to leave, but something drew me forward, a compulsion I couldn't explain. Thompson touched the soil beside one skeleton, and it shifted under his fingers, as though it had been waiting for him. He stumbled back, pale and shaking. "It's alive," he whispered. I tried to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Alive. Not living, not breathing, but aware. Watching. Waiting. The fog thickened, curling into shapes that seemed almost human, almost animal, weaving between gravestones, brushing our legs, pressing against our backs. And the whispers grew louder. Names. Hundreds of them. Called for help, warnings, half-sentences that made no sense. Some I recognized, officers who had walked these paths before, missing for months. Some I did not. All of them caught, trapped, feeding this whatever this was. I stumbled over another grave, and my flashlight beam caught movement ahead. Another skeleton, half buried, half assembled, lying as though it had fallen from some impossible height. Its skull turned toward me, and I swear I saw its jaw shift slightly, as though it were sighing. I staggered back, stomach turning. Thompson grabbed my arm. "We need to leave. Now." But leaving wasn't simple. The fog shifted in response to our movements, curling around gravestones to block our path, folding spaces in ways that defied geometry. A familiar path suddenly ended at a twisted tree I hadn't seen before, branches curling down to brush the ground. Another path looped back to the center of the cemetery, the skeletons still lying in their patient, deliberate arrangement. I realized then that the skeletons weren't just placed randomly. They formed patterns, shapes I couldn't immediately comprehend. Lines, circles, curves. It was as though the cemetery itself were arranging them, teaching us, warning us, marking something we couldn't see. I felt the fog pressing closer, alive, watching, aware of our realization. I turned back toward the patrol road, but the fog had thickened again, hiding familiar landmarks. Thompson muttered prayers under his breath. I wanted to join him, to cling to something solid, but the fog brushed against my thoughts, curling into memories I hadn't wanted to remember. I saw my own hands in skeletal form, scattered across gravestones, a warning, a promise. The whispers became sharper, louder, pressing into my skull. "You are next. You are next." We stumbled forward blindly, tripping over roots and loose stones. The skeleton seemed to shift as we passed, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Bones had lain flat, now propped upright, skulls tilted to follow us. I could feel their gaze on us, patient, deliberate, waiting for the moment we faltered. And then we heard it, a low, dragging sound, slow and deliberate, moving between the graves. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw a shape lifting a skeleton, carrying it in impossible silence, moving it to another grave. I froze. Thompson grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I could only nod, mouth dry, heart hammering. It was real. It was happening, and we were powerless to stop it. We tried to retreat, moving toward the patrol road, but the fog conspired against us. Gravestones shifted in periphery of vision. Rows lengthened, trees leaned impossibly to block the path. Every step forward folded the cemetery around us, looping us back toward the center. The skeletons remained half-assembled, patient, deliberate part of the cemetery itself now. I realized in the truth. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't human error. The cemetery, the fog, the skeletons, they were alive in some sense. They rearranged themselves, moved bodies, played with us, marking us, testing us. The fog fed on fear, patience, and hesitation. Every scream, every startled step, every glance at the half-assembled bones strengthened it. We finally reached a slightly clearer patch, a space where the fog thinned enough to see the patrol road just beyond. Thompson gasped for air, voice shaking. We can't stay here. I nodded, but part of me knew it didn't matter. We had walked these paths before, and the cemetery remembered. It would not let us leave untouched. That night, back at the station, we filed our report. Officers whispered about our pale faces, the shaking hands, the hollow eyes. Some refused to believe, but the logs showed the skeletons, the reports of missing bodies, the dragging sounds in the fog. The pattern was clear. Half-assembled skeletons scattered across graves, shifting when unseen, moved by something patient, deliberate, alive. Sleep became impossible after that. I dreamed of bones, of fog, of shadows moving silently between gravestones. I dreamt of my own hands splayed across the earth, my skull tilted and watching. And I understood with a creeping horror that the cemetery would never let go. It was patient, it was deliberate, and it was hungry. Even now, writing this, I can feel the fog curling at the edges of my vision, twisting around the corners of my mind. I know the skeletons are still there, scattered, half-assembled, waiting for the next patrol, waiting for someone to falter, to feed it, to become part of its patient design. I know that if I close my eyes too long, I will see them again. Their empty eye sockets, their twisted arrangements, their patient, deliberate awareness. The cemetery has memory. The fog has intent. And the skeletons, they are not merely bones. They are warnings. They are the remnants of the forgotten, the lost, the taken, and they are patient, deliberate, waiting for the next soul. I thought the skeletons were bad enough. I thought that night of dragging sounds, half-reassembled bones, and fog that seemed alive had been the worst of it. I was wrong. The next morning, when we went back to the cemetery, the fog had lifted, leaving the ground cold and wet. Dew clung to gravestones like tiny, unblinking eyes, and the earth smelled metallic, damp, heavy. I followed the patrol route again, flashlight in hand, boots sinking slightly in the soft soil. I told myself I was being careful, logical, steady, but even in daylight, the cemetery felt wrong. It started with a symbol. At first, I thought it was a scratch, maybe some child graffiti, etched into the headstone of a recently disturbed grave. But as I stepped closer, I realized it was deliberate. Straight lines intersecting at odd angles, circles within triangles, small markings around the edges that looked almost like runes. The carvings were shallow but precise, and they radiated an unease that made my skin crawl. Thompson was behind me, squinting. "What the hell?" he muttered. "It wasn't there yesterday." I nodded, though my throat felt dry, tight. It hadn't been there. I knew it hadn't. The grave had been undisturbed except for the skeletons, and we had seen that firsthand. Now, these symbols had appeared overnight, as though the cemetery itself had decided to mark the spot. We checked the surrounding graves. More symbols appeared, scratches in the soil, carvings in stone, strange arrangements of stones and twigs, almost ritualistic. I shivered. Someone or something was leaving a trail, leaving a mark, a warning, or a signature, and the precision, the pattern, told me it wasn't human, at least not human in the way we understand it. I crouched to examine one of the carvings more closely. The lines seemed to shift when I blinked, subtle movements that made my stomach knot. The soil around a grave had been turned over, disturbed in an unnatural symmetry, as though someone had danced in a pattern that made no sense, but that meant something to the observer. Thompson leaned over my shoulder, pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. It's a warning," he said, "or a signature, like it's saying this is mine." And I realized with a sinking certainty that it wasn't the fog this time. This was deliberate, patient, deliberate, calculated. Someone or something was choosing graves, scattering bones, carving symbols, leaving us a message. And the message was clear. We weren't supposed to understand it. We weren't supposed to survive it. We continued down the rows, moving carefully between gravestones. Every few meters, another mark appeared, another symbol etched into stone, into soil, into the very bones of the cemetery. Some were small, almost imperceptible, requiring a flashlight even in daylight. Others were large, sprawling, impossible to ignore, and each carried the same feeling, the same weight, the same awareness. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some cult, some sick individuals performing rituals in the dead of night. But the precision, the scale, the speed, no human could have done this. Not without being seen, not without leaving some trace. And then there was a pattern. The symbols weren't random. They formed lines, paths, circles, almost maps, guiding us, marking us, daring us to follow. Thompson touched one of the carvings, and I saw the soil shift beneath his fingers, not like dirt moving naturally. It writhed, almost alive, curling around his hand, pressing, twisting. He pulled back quickly, pale, whispering, "It's moving." I nodded because I saw it too. The carvings weren't static. They weren't just marks. They were part of something bigger, something patient, deliberate, hungry. We found a grave at the center of the pattern, larger than the others, disturbed in a way that was impossible. The soil had been turned over in concentric circles, deep and precise. Stones formed arch around it, small and sharp, almost like teeth, and at the center, the bones. Not one skeleton, but several, scattered, arranged into a mockery of life. Arms crossed, skulls tilted, fingers intertwined. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to look away, to tell myself it was staged, but I couldn't. Something about the arrangement, about the precision, pressed against my mind. It wasn't just a display. It was a statement, a ritual, a claim. The cemetery itself had become a stage, and we were part of the audience. Thompson's voice trembled. Why do this? I had no answer. I only knew that the fog from before, the shadows, the dragging sounds, they were all connected. This cemetery was alive in ways we couldn't understand, guided by something patient, deliberate, intelligent. And now, it had a name, a signature, the Collector. We moved slowly, carefully, documenting the symbols, the disturbed graves, the skeletal arrangements. Each step brought a new pattern, each pattern more complex than the last. Circles intersecting triangles, lines cutting through rows of stones, bones arranged as if spelling a message in some ancient language. My head spun, trying to comprehend it. The Collector was marking the cemetery like a chessboard, leaving pieces, leaving warnings, leaving instructions. And then I heard it, the faintest scraping just at the edge of hearing. My flashlight swung toward the sound. A figure, tall, dark, indistinct, stood at the edge of the fog that was beginning to creep back in. I froze. Thompson whispered, "Don't move." The figure didn't move like a human. It glided, patient, deliberate, its presence pressing against us like water. It wasn't threatening, not yet, but the intent was clear. It was a Collector, watching, waiting, judging. The fog thickened around the gravestones, swirling in patterns that mimicked the symbols, curling around our ankles, pressing against our legs. I could hear whispers, faint, almost indistinct, carried on the wind that wasn't there. Names, commands, pleas, warnings. Some I recognized, officers missing for months. Some I did not. And in the center of it all, the Collector moved, patient, deliberate, claiming its space. I realized then that the skeletons, the symbols, the fog, they were all connected. The Collector used the cemetery like a canvas, arranging bones, carving symbols, shaping the mist, feeding on our fear. Each pattern was a ritual, each arrangement a warning, each movement a claim, and we had walked right into it. We tried to retreat, moving slowly toward a patrol road, but the fog had thickened so much that we could barely see our own hands. Gravestones shifted subtly, paths that had been opened now closed. Loops formed where none existed before. The symbols glowed faintly in the mist, not with light, but with awareness. They moved in response to our presence, reshaping the cemetery, guiding us, herding us toward the center. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. Thompson whispered again, his voice trembling. It knows us. It knows we're here. I could only nod because I felt it too, eyes on the back of my neck. The weight of something patient, deliberate, intelligent pressing against my mind. The collector wasn't just marking graves. It was marking us. The last thing we saw before finally breaking to the fog to Patrol Road was a symbol carved into the earth, impossibly large, spanning 3 graves. At its center lay a single skull, eyes empty, jaws slightly open as though sighing. The collector's mark, its signature, a warning. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the cemetery would never stop, that the collector would wait, patient and deliberate, shaping the mist, the bones, the shadows, until the next soul stumbled into its design. Back at the precinct, we filed a report. The other officers whispered, uneasy, refusing to venture near the cemetery again. The logs recorded the symbols, the disturbed graves, the arrangements of skeletons, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I could feel it. The collector's presence, patient, deliberate, waiting for the next patrol, the next misstep, the next soul to mark. Even now, writing this, I can feel the symbols etched into my memory, the arrangement of bones, the fog pressing at the corners of my vision. I know the collector is still out there, still patient, still deliberate, shaping its cemetery, waiting, always waiting. And I know that if I ever return to that place, I will see its marks again. I will feel its gaze, and I will realize with that cold certainty that nothing about that cemetery is random. Nothing is innocent. The skeletons of fog, the symbols, they're all connected. And the collector is patient, deliberate, hungry. I never expected the cemetery to hide more than gravestones and fog. I thought the skeletons, the marks, the collector were the worst of it. I was wrong. It started when Thompson and I found a small, weathered stone at the edge of the old cemetery, half buried in moss. Carved into it was one of those symbols we had come to dread. The straight lines intersecting at impossible angles, triangles within circles, a signature of the collector. But beneath it, etched almost invisibly, was a stairway symbol pointing downward. I stared at it for a long moment, my stomach twisting. "Looks like a stairway," I said. Thompson didn't respond. His face was pale, lips pressed together. I could feel the tension radiating off him. Neither of us wanted to be here, yet I knew we would follow it. We always followed. Something drew us. The same pull that had made us walk among skeletons, that had made us stare at symbols, that had made the fog reach for us. It was pulling us now downward. The stairway was narrow, carved from rough stone, twisting into darkness. A faint musty smell drifted up, earthy, like mold and decay, but underneath it, something else, metallic, sharp. I swallowed hard and shined my flashlight down. The steps descended into blackness. My pulse quickened, my hands trembled, and yet I stepped forward. Thompson followed, muttering prayers under his breath. The air grew colder as we descended. Damp stone walls closed in, slick with moisture, narrowing until our shoulders brushed against them. The sound of our boots echoed unnaturally, distorted, as though the catacombs themselves were swallowing the noise. Every step seemed to press deeper into my mind. I could feel it, the same patient, deliberate presence we had felt in the cemetery, waiting below, watching. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a larger chamber. The smell hit me first. Something worse than decay, heavier, more suffocating. Iron, rot, and something sweet, almost cloying like old incense. And then I saw them. Bodies. Not just skeletons this time, but full corpses, some skeletal, some decayed beyond recognition. Others surprisingly intact. They were arranged on the floor in patterns, twisted, limbs bent at impossible angles. Their eyes, empty or milky with death, seemed to follow us. I stepped forward, trying to make sense of it, to find some rational explanation. But the patterns were deliberate. Circles, lines, geometric shapes carved into the stone floor around the bodies. Symbols etched into the walls, glowing faintly, though I saw no source of light. I swallowed hard, throat tight. This wasn't random. This was ritual, a temple of death, a hidden chamber of horrors. Thompson's hand gripped my arm. "We shouldn't be here," he whispered. I nodded, but part of me wanted to look closer, wanted to understand, wanted to see what the collector had left for us. But something in the air told me it would not be kind to our curiosity. The whispers began, soft at first, barely audible, threading through the stone corridors. Names, commands, warnings, please. My head spun, trying to focus. Some names I recognized, officers we had lost, people missing from patrols, their voices thin, distant, desperate. And then one voice, faint, almost my own, calling, "Don't look, don't move, don't touch." I took another step. My flashlight fell across a pile of bones arranged in a spiral, the center forming a skull, its jaw slightly open, as if sighing. The spiral seemed to expand and contract in the dim light, twisting my stomach, pressing on my mind. I realized with cold certainty that the collector had shaped this chamber, each body, each symbol, each shadow intentionally, patiently. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. We moved slowly through the chamber, careful not to disturb the arrangements. But the moment we passed, I noticed subtle changes. Limbs shifted slightly. Skulls tilted toward us. Shadows stretched in impossible ways along the walls. The catacombs themselves seemed alive, responding to our presence, tracking us, marking us. Then I saw the door, or what looked like a door. Stone, old, heavy, set into the far wall. A faint light seeped through the cracks, pale and flickering. Relief surged, but it was short-lived. As we approached, the whispers intensified, overlapping, layered, pressing against my ears and skull. Names again, familiar and unfamiliar, commands, threats, half-formed sentences I could not comprehend. The door wouldn't budge. No matter how hard we pushed, pulled, it remained sealed. Behind us, the chamber seemed to shift subtly. The pile of bodies in the center rearranged itself, forming a circle, limbs intertwining, skulls pointing toward us. The symbols etched in the floor glowed faintly, reacting to our panic. And then the dragging sound returned. Slow, deliberate, coming from everywhere and nowhere, moving among the bodies. I could feel it then, the collector itself. Not a single figure, not one shape, but a presence. Patient, deliberate, aware, alive in some way I could not understand. It wasn't attacking yet. It was observing, waiting for the moment we faltered, for the moment we showed fear. And we were trembling, paralyzed, caught in its design. We turned back toward the stairs, hoping to retreat, but the corridor we had come down seemed different, narrower, longer, twisting in ways that hadn't existed before. The walls seemed to close in, pressing, slick with moisture, the stone cold against my fingertips. Every step backward twisted the chamber in subtle ways. I realized then that the catacombs themselves were part of Collector's design. They shifted, responded, reshaped themselves around our presence. We were trapped, patient and deliberate, in a maze we could not comprehend. Thompson whispered my name, voice shaking. We shouldn't have followed it. We shouldn't have come down here. I nodded, unable to answer. I felt the weight of every missing officer, every body, every skeleton, pressing down on me. The chamber was alive with intent. Each body, each symbol a part of some ritual we could not understand. The collector was shaping us, testing us, marking us as it had marked the cemetery. Then, in a corner of the chamber, I saw movement. A figure, tall, featureless, gliding along the walls, just at the edge of the dim light. I froze. Thompson's hand gripped mine. The figure stopped, tilting its head toward us, patient, deliberate. The dragging sound moved closer, following it. My pulse raced, my vision narrowed, heart hammering. I understood then in a gut-deep certainty that we were being studied, observed, marked, and the collector was preparing something for us, something we could not yet comprehend. We tried the stairs again. This time, I felt it, an almost imperceptible pressure behind me, pushing, curling around my shoulders. The bodies shifted subtly, symbols reacting. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing into my lungs. I realized that if we moved too fast, panicked, or hesitated, The chamber would respond. It would trap us further. And I knew we were running out of options. I and the faint light seeping from the door. I saw another pile of bodies, arranged in a spiral, hands interlaced, skulls tilted toward the ceiling, the symbols on the walls twisted, reacting to our panic. I felt the whispers inside my skull, not just echoing but pressing, demanding attention, carving names into memory. Thompson shivered violently beside me. We have to leave," he stammered. I nodded, trying to focus, trying to remember the steps back. The corridor shifted again, walls twisting, symbols glowing faintly along the stone. The dragging sound grew louder, circling, moving, patient, deliberate. I realized then that the catacombs weren't just underground passages. They were alive, extensions of the collector itself, reacting to fear, curiosity, hesitation. They would not let us leave unmarked. Finally, with trembling hands, we pushed the door. It groaned, heavy stone sliding against stone, and we forced it open just enough to slip through. The light of the cemetery greeted us, pale, flickering, but real. Relief surged, short-lived. Behind us, the chamber twisted, shifting subtly, as though it were breathing, alive and patient. Waiting for the next intruder, we stumbled into the open air, gasping, hearts hammering. The fog curled around the cemetery like fingers, reaching for us, patient and deliberate. I looked back once, just long enough to see the symbols faintly glowing through cracks of the door we had just escaped. The bodies, the arrangements, the whispers, all still there, waiting. The collector was patient, deliberate, and we had survived this encounter only because it allowed us to leave. Even now, I can feel it, the pull of the catacombs, the weight of those bodies, the whispers in the stone. The collector left a mark on me, carved in memory, a reminder that it is patient, deliberate, and alive in ways I cannot comprehend. And I know that one day we will return, because curiosity, fear, or duty, it doesn't matter. The collector will call us back, and the catacombs will be ready. I thought we had escaped the catacombs. I thought, after the fog, the skeletons, the symbols, and the shifting underground corridors, that we were done. I was wrong. It started with a routine patrol. I know how foolish that sounds, but after what we had seen, we were still bound by duty. I walked the same paths, flashlight in hand, boots crunching over the frost-damp soil. The fog had thinned that night, giving the cemetery a deceptive calm. Gravestones stood silent, shadows long but seemingly inert. Thompson had been called away on another assignment. I was alone. The first sign was subtle. A whisper, soft, almost playful, carried on the wind, or maybe through my mind. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, heart hammering. The wind shifted, curling around gravestones, carrying the faint metallic scent of blood and decay. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, imagination, nerves. But the moment I stepped forward, I knew the collector was here. The path before me seemed normal, until I reached a small clearing. Bones littered the ground. Small bones, human, arranged haphazardly, half buried in the earth. But they weren't random. They formed a pattern, a spiral leading toward the center of the clearing, and in the middle, a freshly turned mound of earth. Unlike any grave I had seen, the soil was dark, damp, and packed in a way that suggested it had been dug by hand, or by something impossibly strong. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave, but I couldn't. I wanted to understand. I wanted to see what the collector had done this time. My boots crunched over small bones as I approached, and the whispering grew louder, overlapping, layering, pressing into my thoughts. Closer, closer, closer. I knelt at the edge of the mound and saw it. My reflection, not in water, not in glass, but in the soil itself. The earth shifted subtly, a shadow moving beneath the surface, forming shapes that should not exist. I recoiled. A hand, thin, pale, impossibly long, emerged from the dirt, followed by another. My stomach churned, nausea rising. The collector didn't just play with bones. It harvested flesh. It sculpted it, claimed it, and now it was coming for me. I jumped back, stumbling, and the mound erupted. Hands clawed at me from every direction, pulling, grasping. The ground was alive. The soil, the bones, the dirt. They were all extensions of Collector. I screamed, but no one was there to hear. My flashlight clattered to ground, spinning in the dirt, illuminating shadows that twisted and shifted with impossible angles. I tried to run, but the earth moved beneath my feet. Roots, bones, tendrils of soil wrapped around my ankles, pulling me back, dragging me toward the mound. The whispers became voices, clear now, desperate, pleading. Names I recognized: Thompson, officers missing for months, others I had never met, and then mine. My name, shouted in a cold, thin, deliberate tone. Kashif. I fell face first into the soil, struggling, hands clawing at the dirt, but it held me. Stronger than stone, patient, deliberate. The mound split open, and from it emerged a Collector. Not a human shape, not one figure, but a shifting presence, darker than shadow, stretching, bending, gliding with intent. Its eyes, or what felt like eyes, pressed into me, and I understood. This was its trap, its claim. I was not escaping tonight. I screamed again, louder, but the fog wrapped around me, swallowing the sound, pressing against my chest. My hands found nothing solid to grasp, and then the mound soil began to rise, climbing over me, pressing down, covering my legs, my torso. My flashlight, still spinning in the dirt, flickered weakly, illuminating bones, symbols, and shadows that moved toward me. I felt myself sinking, the cold earth pressing into every part of me, heavy, deliberate, unstoppable. The Collector's whispers became commands. Stay become join weight. I tried to fight, kicking, thrashing, clawing at the soil, but it held firm. The air was thick, damp, pressing into my lungs. I could feel the weight of every missing officer. Every body the Collector had claimed before me. Their presence pressed against me, guiding the earth, holding me down, folding me into the pattern. I thought of my family, my friends, the life I had left behind. My mind clawed at reality, searching for logic, for reason, for a way out. But there was none. The soil had intent. The mound had awareness. And the Collector was patient, deliberate, and insatiable. I struggled for breath, the dirt filling my mouth, my nose. Shadows danced above me, writhing, forming shapes of skulls, hands, faces frozen in terror. Whispers layered over each other, voices merging into a chorus that pressed against my skull, carving my name, my fear, into memory. Kashif, you are mine. And then, just as panic threatened to consume me, I realized something. The Collector didn't need to kill me immediately. It didn't need to suffocate me entirely. It had time, patience, deliberate intent. It wanted me trapped, part of its pattern, part of its ritual, patient, deliberate, waiting. I was not merely buried. I was becoming part of the Collector's design. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time lost all meaning. The whispers continued, pressing, layering, twisting into my mind. I could hear my heartbeat, loud, rapid, echoing against the walls of the grave. My limbs ached, pressed into the soil, but I could not move. I realized that if I struggled too much, it would accelerate the process, and if I surrendered too soon, I would become part of the Collector's collection without resistance. There was no winning, only endurance, only survival or the illusion of it. I could feel fingers, pale, thin, impossibly long, pressing against my body through the soil, shifting bones, guiding me into a position the Collector desired. My chest pressed against earth that moved like water, carrying me, folding me into its pattern. The whispers instructed, directed, guiding me. Names repeated. Faces formed in the darkness beneath the soil. I could see them, not physically, but in my mind, eyes hollow, watching, judging. And then the realization came. This wasn't just a trap. It was art. It was ritual. The Collector collected not merely bodies, but fear, compliance, despair. Each officer claim became part of its ever-growing tableau. Patient, deliberate, precise. I was now part of that tableau, woven into its design, my mind, my body, my fear feeding it, sustaining it. The air became thinner, heavier, the soil harder against my skin, yet I could still move slightly, guided by invisible hands. I realized that I could scream all I wanted, thrash all I wanted. It would do nothing but add to the collector's satisfaction. This was the end game, the final step. I was being added to a collection that would outlast me, outlast every patrol, every officer, every mortal presence. I thought of Thompson again. I thought of the others. I wondered if they had understood what we were up against, if they had known that the collector was patient, deliberate, and omnipresent. My own mind screamed, fighting to grasp some reality, some logic. But it was gone. Only the earth, the whispers, the shadows remained. I felt the last of my strength fading as the soil pressed over my chest, my head, my arms. My flashlight had long since died, leaving only darkness, thick, alive, pressing, deliberate. I was part of the mound now, integrated, folded into the pattern. The whispers became clearer, guiding me into final position, aligning me with the symbols, the bodies, the bones. I was not dying. I was joining. And then, as my awareness narrowed to the singular sensation of being held, pressed, observed, I understood the final truth. The collector did not merely take. It preserved, it shapes, it marks, it waits. And I, buried alive, was the newest piece in its endless collection, patient, deliberate, insatiable. The last thought I had, the final image burned into memory, was a mound before me, the spiral of bones, the pattern of symbols, the shadows of the bodies, and me folded into it, part of it, the collector's mark complete. And the whispers never stopped. Even now, even in writing this, I can feel the soil around me, feel the whispers in my skull, feel the collector's patience, deliberate and unyielding. And I know, with a certainty colder than the earth itself, that I am not gone. I am waiting, part of the collection, part of the design, patient, deliberate, and eternal. The night had settled into a heavy, almost oppressive quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, fills a room with a sense of waiting. I was on the graveyard shift, alone at the precinct except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the distant hum of the heater. My partner had called out sick, leaving me with the radios, the logs, and the constant tick of the clock on the wall. I was used to the isolation. I liked it most nights. It let me think, it let me breathe. But that night, something felt different. The air was thick, heavy, almost humid despite the chill creeping under the door. I shrugged it off at first, attributing it to fatigue, the long hours, the monotony of paperwork. It began with a crackle. Low, faint at first, from the radio on my desk. Just static. I frowned, tapping it, adjusting the dial. Nothing. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the dark windows. The cemetery beyond was barely visible under the sparse streetlights, a dark shape of rows of gravestones I had come to know so well. Then I heard it, a voice, low, rasping, almost swallowed by static. I froze. 13 shots, basement, blood on the wall. The words made my skin crawl. I glanced at the radio again, fingers trembling slightly. The channel had been silent for hours. No calls, no dispatches, nothing. My stomach tightened. I pressed the talk button, half expecting to hear a reply from dispatch. Nothing, just more static. Then the voice repeated, clearer this time. 13 shots, basement, blood on the wall. I couldn't move. My hands gripped the edge of the desk. The words weren't random. They weren't vague. They were specific. And they were old. Cases I remember from reports, files I had read during my training, crimes that had been closed months ago, crimes that were real. I picked up the radio, holding it close to my ear. The voice changed slightly, shifting tone, cadence, almost mocking. He didn't see her. Screams in the alley, left in the dumpster. My pulse raced. I knew the cases. I remembered the files. But no one had been near this precinct for these crimes. And yet, the radio spoke with the authority of someone or something that had been there. Someone recounting the events with exacting precision, as if it had witnessed them firsthand. I tried to convince myself it was interference, a prank, a hallucination. My mind, tired and fraying at the edges from long hours, was playing tricks. But the names came next. Names of victims, officers, suspects. Names I knew personally, names that should not have been spoken again. The voice whispered them through static, repeating them in a rhythm that made my chest tighten. Mary Jensen, basement, left alone, never came home. I froze, fingers trembling over controls. Mary Jensen. I had investigated her case months ago. A missing person found too late, buried in an alley not far from the precinct. The voice repeated her name, each syllable drawn out, deliberate, and something about it. It wasn't just repeating the crime. It was reliving it, replaying it, teaching it. Mark Reynolds, alley. 13 shots, body left in the dumpster. Every hair on my body stood on end. My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't move. The voice, crackling through static, recited each detail with the patience of a storyteller, the precision of someone who had lived each moment. I pressed the channel buttons frantically, switching frequencies, hoping for a normal dispatch tone, a break in the nightmare. Nothing. The whispers grew layered, overlapping now, multiple voices speaking at once through the radio, each one reciting a crime, a name, a place, crimes I had read in files, cases that had haunted me during investigations, victims I remembered visiting in morgues or hospitals. The voices didn't pause. They didn't care if I listened. They were patient, deliberate, endless. I leaned back in my chair, trying to ground myself, to breathe. The clock ticked toward 3:17 a.m., and still the voices flowed, recounting scenes of horror like a litany, like prayers to something that should not exist. I tried to rationalize. Could it be a hacker? Someone feeding false reports into the system? But the names, the places, the precise details. How can anyone know them? He followed her, corner pine and 5-13 shots, nothing left. My chest tightened, a cold sweat breaking out along my back. I remembered that case. The files, the pictures, the crime scene photos that had kept me awake for nights. Tracing the details, thinking about what had happened, what had been left behind. And now, the radio spoke of it as if it had happened minutes ago, as if the scene were replaying live for me. The whispers shifted again, closer, faster, almost urgent. I could hear my own name, though muffled, twisted through the static. Kashif? Kashif? Listen, 13 shots. My hands flew to my ears, pressing the radio away. I shook my head, muttering to myself, trying to shake the hallucination. I told myself I was tired, imagining things, letting paranoia seep in. But then I realized the whisper wasn't in my ears. It was in my mind. The radio didn't just speak. It demanded attention. It carved the images of crimes into my skull, painting the past in vivid, horrifying detail. Door slammed, basement not alone, 13 shots. I couldn't take it anymore. I stumbled from the desk, radio clattering to floor, static crackling louder, voices overlapping, layering, impossible to separate. I backed toward the wall, heart hammering. Names, places, screams, cries, they weren't just auditory. They were memory. They were accusation. They were judgment. The radio fell silent suddenly. I froze, waiting. My pulse slowed just slightly, but the silence felt heavier than the noise. And then it came again, a single, slow whisper, barely audible, but crystal clear. You're next. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the chair, chest tight, sweat soaking my shirt. My mind raced. Could it be a prank? No. Impossible. Not after the specificity. Not after the layering of voices. The details only someone present or something supernatural could know. My gaze fell to the radio, lying on the floor, flickering weakly, static crackling faintly. And then the lights flickered. Just once, but long enough to make the shadows in the room twist unnaturally. My stomach lurched. I realized then that the radio wasn't just repeating crimes. It was aware, watching, waiting, teaching, threatening, and I was alone with it. Alone, vulnerable, listening to every crime committed, every life ended, every whispered judgment flowing through the dead channels. I picked up the radio, hands shaking, pressing buttons frantically. Nothing. Silence. Only the faint, lingering static that carried the echo of voices. repeating past horrors in my mind. I pressed the frequency for dispatch. No response. I called my partner on the other line. No answer. The dead night pressing around me, patient, deliberate, hungry. I sank into my chair, heart hammering, trying to calm myself, trying to remember that the night would end, that dawn would come. But I knew, deep down, that something had awakened or had always been awake. The radio was just the first sign. The whispers weren't random. They were deliberate, patient, feeding, shaping, observing. And I, alone on the graveyard shift, had become the audience. The clock moved closer to 4 a.m., but time lost meaning. The whispers, names, crimes, voices, they lingered in my mind. They would not leave. They carved themselves into memory, a record, a warning. I knew that the night would pass, but I would never be the same. I knew the radio would call again at 3 a.m. tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Patient, deliberate, endless. And as I finally sank back, exhausted, trembling, I realized that the radio wasn't just repeating crimes. It was marking me, teaching me, waiting. And I knew that when the next voice came, it wouldn't just speak of past horrors. It would speak of me. Kashif, you are next. The whisper echoed in my mind as I stared at the silent radio, realizing that nothing would ever be normal again. The graveyard wasn't outside. It wasn't the fog. It wasn't even the skeletons. The horror had found a way inside, into the mind, into the memory, into the very air I breathed. And I was trapped, alone, listening, waiting. The night after the radio first spoke, I didn't sleep, not because of the normal anxiety that comes with the graveyard shift or the loneliness of an empty precinct, but because I knew, deep down, I wasn't alone. The voices hadn't stopped. They had only gone quiet, patient, deliberate, waiting for me to sit at that desk again, to tune the radio to the right frequency. When I returned the next night, the silence of the precinct was worse than the noise from before. It pressed into my chest, heavy, cold. The fluorescent lights flickering above and slow, uneven pulses. The radio sat on the desk, lifeless, just as I had left them. But I didn't trust that silence. I never would again. I sat down, staring at the desk, breathing slowly, trying to convince myself that it had been interference, fatigue, stress, anything human. But deep in the pit of my stomach, a whisper of dread told me otherwise. I knew what was coming, and then it began. At first, it was soft, nearly imperceptible. Static crackle from the radio, low, pulsing, like a heartbeat. I leaned in, hand hovering over the dial. The hum grew louder, sharper, and then voices, not just repeating past crimes this time. No, this was different. Kashif, you'll be in the alley midnight, do not run. I froze. My hand shook as I reached for the radio. The voice was calm, deliberate, like it was rehearsed, like it had been waiting to speak these words for a long time. It didn't just know me. It knew what I would do, what I might think. It spoke of a place I had never been to, a time that hadn't come yet. Thompson by the dumpster, he didn't see them coming. I dropped the radio, my stomach twisting. Thompson, my partner, the one who called out last night. The voice was describing events as though they had already happened, but I knew they hadn't. They couldn't have. The weight of realization pressed down on me. This wasn't just recording past crimes. This was predicting the future. Or worse, shaping it. I backed away from the desk, hands trembling. The static intensified, voices layering over one another, faster, sharper, louder. I could hear more names now. Officers, victims, people I didn't even recognize. And each one was paired with method of death, a place, a time, events that hadn't happened yet, but were being narrated with horrifying clarity. Kashif, the stairwell, blood on your hands, cannot escape. I sank to the floor, heart hammering. The voice or voices knew me, not in a general sense. Knew me intimately. My habits, my fears, my patterns. And it didn't just speak. It insisted, commanding attention, guiding my thoughts, forcing me to picture what it described. I saw myself in a narrow stairwell, alone, trapped, the walls closing in, the sound of my own screams echoing endlessly. The radios crackled, and the air in the precinct seemed to thicken. I could feel it pressing against my skin, against my chest. Shadows stretched across the walls, elongated, moving ever so slightly, responding to words. And then I heard it, a faint knock, not at the door, not in the hall, but in my head, synchronized with the voice. Knock, knock. Every beat matched the rhythm of the crimes it described. The footsteps of officers who had not yet fallen. The thuds of bodies hitting the floor. Do not look back, basement. 13 steps, it waits. I couldn't stop the visions. Each word the radio spoke painted a scene of blood, horror, and inevitable death. I saw Thompson being dragged down a narrow hallway, silent except for the scrape of shoes on concrete. I saw my reflection in a puddle, my own blood on the walls. And every time I thought it was just imagination, the static would shift, the voices would whisper, and my pulse would hammer with the certainty that what I was seeing was coming. I tried to leave. I wanted to run, to escape the room, the precinct, this building that suddenly felt like a tomb. But my legs refused. The fear was paralyzing, but not in the normal sense. This was deeper. It was a grip around my mind, tightening, forcing me to sit, to watch, to listen. The radio demanded it, and I obeyed. You'll find the bodies behind the graves, cannot stop it. The words were like knives slicing into my thoughts. Behind the graves. Graves I had walked past 100 times. Graves that I knew held the dead. And yet, now, they were alive in the narrative. Active. Waiting. The voice on the radio described the scene in such detail. I could smell the damp earth, the decay, the copper tang of blood in the air. My hands went clammy. I felt my throat close. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. They are waiting for you, cannot leave, cannot warn anyone. The voices multiplied. Each radio on the desk hummed to life, even those I hadn't touched. Static and whispers filled the room, overlapping, merging into a chorus of inevitable deaths. Officers I had trained with, walked with, laughed with. Now they were all part of this chorus, narrating events that hadn't happened yet, but were certain. Certain as a rising sun, certain as the cold winter air outside. I pressed my hands to my ears, rocking back and forth. I wanted to deny it, to convince myself I was losing my mind. But the facts were there, the visions, the whispers, the specificity of the names and places. The voice knew. It knew the future, or it was creating it, and there was nothing I could do. Kashif, the alley, do not resist. It is coming. I had to move, had to get away. But even as I pushed my feet, my legs heavy and trembling, I felt a presence. Not physical, not yet, but it was there, waiting, deliberate, patient, observing my every movement. And the radios kept whispering, narrating the next steps I would take, the choices I would make, the fear I would feel. The end is near, cannot escape, cannot survive. I stumbled out of the precinct into the parking lot. Cold air hitting my face. It should have felt like relief. It should have felt like freedom. But the whispers followed. The static pressed against my ears, now carried on the wind. I could hear the footsteps described in the radio, the scuff of shoes, the drag of bodies. And even as I ran, I could hear the narration of my own death. Every detail, every sound, every moment laid out with terrifying precision. I didn't know if it was prophecy or manipulation. I didn't know if the radio spoke the future or forced it into existence. I only knew the certainty, the patient, deliberate certainty that I would not escape, that my name would be called, that my actions, my fear, my life were no longer my own. Kashif, do not resist. The alley waits. 13 steps, 13 shots. I collapsed against my patrol car, hands over my ears, tears streaming down my face. The voices continued, relentless, describing a fate I could not avoid. I tried to shut them out, tried to rationalize, tried to run. But the moment I closed my eyes, I saw the alley, saw the steps, saw the blood, saw the shadows waiting, patient and deliberate, watching me. And the whispers, always the whispers, repeating my name. You will be next. I don't know how long I sat there, trembling in the cold, listening to voices that knew the future. I don't know if anyone else would believe me. If anyone else could understand that the radio wasn't broken, that it wasn't random interference, that it wasn't even human, it was something else. Something patient, deliberate, shaping events, narrating my life before it happened, feeding off my fear, guiding the inevitable. And even now, writing this down, the memory presses in heavy, insistent. The voices haven't stopped. The radios are silent again for now, but I know they will speak. They are patient. They are deliberate. They are waiting. And when they speak again, it won't just be past crimes they recite. It will be my fate, my death, my inevitable end. Kashif, the alley, do not resist. It is coming. You are next. The whisper echoes in my mind, long after the night ended, long after the radios went silent. And I know, deep in my bones, that the voices are patient. They are deliberate. They are always listening, always waiting. I shouldn't have gone back. I knew at the moment I drove past the gates of the cemetery, the radio humming softly beside me. Its static like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. Every fiber in my body screamed at me to turn around, to leave the night behind. But some force, call it fear, call it obsession, call it madness, kept me moving forward. The fog had rolled in thicker than usual, curling around the gravestones in ghostly fingers, and the pale light of my cruiser cut through it like a knife. I parked near the old crypt at the far end, the one marked only by a cracked stone bearing no name. It had always been sealed, its heavy doors chained and locked decades ago. Or so I had thought. I stepped out of the car, the cold night pressing into my bones, and the radio crackled once, just once, and then I heard it. The whisper, clearer than ever before. Come closer, see what waits. I froze, my hands clenched at my sides. My rational mind told me to retreat, to drive away and never speak of this again. But the whisper was no longer just static. It was enticing, commanding, promising knowledge, revelation, maybe even escape from the terror I had been living with for weeks. I approached the crypt, every step hesitant, uneven, my boots crunching against the frost-hardened earth. And then it happened. The doors, heavy rusted, centuries old, shook once, twice, and swung open silently, as if pushed by hands unseen. My breath caught in my throat. The inside was pitch black, but not entirely. A faint light seemed to emanate from within, soft and pale, illuminating the edges of stone walls slick with moisture. My stomach churned, my mind screaming at me to run. But I stepped forward. I couldn't stop. You are late. The radio, in my pocket, crackled to life again. The voice was patient, slow, deliberate, echoing through the room like it was everywhere at once. It wasn't just repeating crimes now. It was aware of me, aware of my fear, aware of my curiosity and my dread. It had drawn me here, and it was waiting. I lit my flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness. The air inside the crypt was thick, heavy with decay, a mix of earth and old incense, the smell of centuries pressing against me. My flashlight trembled in my hands, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in the shadows, shapes shifting where there should have been none. You hear them, don't you? The ones who wait, the ones who cannot rest. I swallowed hard. The radio wasn't just a conduit. It was a lure. The voice was not human. It wasn't an echo of past crimes or a spirit whispering of wrongs long done. It was something else, something patient, using the living to feed, to gather, to mark. My pulse raced, every instinct screaming to run. Yet my feet carried me deeper into the crypt. The walls seemed to close around me, the narrow passageways twisting subtly, almost as if the stone itself were alive. And then I saw it, a coffin, ancient, cracked, its lid slightly ajar. From inside came a soft glow, pulsing in time with the static of the radio. The voice spoke again, insistent, almost gentle, coaxing. Look inside, see your fate, it has waited for you. I should have stopped. I should have turned away. But my curiosity, my fear, my helpless need to understand pushed me forward. My hand trembled as I touched the lid, cold and slick with moisture, and lifted it slowly. The beam of my flashlight revealed nothing. Nothing at first. But then the radio crackled and the whisper came, impossibly loud now, filling the space around me. Not empty alive, Listening, waiting, the air shifted. A cold wind brushed my face, carrying the scent of rotten earth, and I saw her, know them. Faces pressed against the inside of the coffin, pale, translucent, screaming silently, eyes wide and empty. They were real, not shadows, not memories, not hallucinations. Real, and they stared at me. Their mouths moved, whisper my name. Their voices carried through the static in the radio, layering, overlapping, insistent. I stumbled back, the lid clanging shut behind me with a hollow, echoing finality. My flashlight flickered violently. The crypt seemed to stretch, walls elongating, passages twisting impossibly. The whisper followed me, patient, deliberate, guiding my steps. They were lost. Now you will see. Now you will learn. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The faces in the coffin weren't alone. All around me, shadows shifted, moving slowly, purposefully, like smoke taking form. And the radio, my lifeline and my curse, crackled with detail, narrating each moment, each movement of these spirits. Each one had been trapped, lured, consumed. Each one was part of the voice, part of the crypt, part of the purpose that now involved me. You listen, you obey, you cannot resist. I realized with a sinking certainty that the radio had always been more than a tool. It was the spirit itself, a consciousness that had found a way into the frequencies, a mind patient and cruel, using sound to manipulate, to teach, to lure the living. And I, foolish, terrified, had followed its instructions straight into the source. The shadows drew closer. They didn't move like living things. They flowed like oil over water, yet each had a form, a face, a presence. I could hear their whispers, overlapping with the radio, repeating names, recounting deaths, narrating horrors that had not yet come to pass. They were teaching me, warning me, claiming me. The next will be yours. See how they suffered, feel what they felt. I could feel it then. Not fear, not terror, not yet. Something colder, deeper, an emptiness pressing into my chest. The spirit didn't just want me to know. It wanted me to become part of the record, part of the cycle it maintained. And as I stumbled through the twisting crypt, guided by the whispers, I could see symbols etched into the walls. Ancient, strange, glowing faintly in the pale light. They pulsed in rhythm with the radio, with the static, with the faces pressed against the stone. Each symbol marked a soul. Each soul had been lured here. Each soul had been taken. Join them. The crypt hungers. It remembers, it waits. My flashlight flickered again. The shadows were closer now, merging into forms I could almost recognize. Officers I had trained with, victims from old cases, even the ones I had seen on the radio. They didn't speak with words anymore. They spoke with presence, with insistence, guiding me, trapping me, folding the walls around me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a loose stone. The radio slipped from my pocket, landing with a clatter that echoed through the crypt. Static hissed from it, almost screaming, and then the whisper came, louder than ever, emanating from the very walls, from the air itself. You cannot leave, you cannot escape, you will speak the names. I dropped to my knees, pressed my hands to my ears, rocking slightly, tried to shut out the sound, the knowledge, the inevitability. But the crypt was alive, and so was the spirit. It had woven itself into every corner, every shadow, every heartbeat. And the radio was its voice, its will, its lure. Kashif, look into the coffin, see what waits. The next one. I couldn't resist. I had to see. Trembling, I crawled forward, hand hovering over the ancient lid again. The static from the radio seemed to fill the crypt, wrapping around me like a fog, whispering, chanting, layering the past, present, and future into a single, inescapable rhythm. I lifted the lid once more, and this time I saw nothing but darkness. A darkness so deep, so absolute, it seemed to swallow the light of my flashlight, the fog from outside, even the air in my lungs. And then the whisper came, close, intimate, inside my mind. You are the next voice, the next witness, the next record. I fell back, gasping, the cold stone pressing against my back. The crypt doors slammed shut on their own, and for a heartbeat, The world was silent. Then the static returned louder, overlapping with whispers, with faces, with names, mine included. The radio was alive with them now. My voice already part of the chorus, waiting to be guided, shaped, lured, consumed. I don't know how long I stayed there, paralyzed, trembling, listening. Time had no meaning, only the voices, the static, the whispers, and the certainty that the crypt, the spirit, the radio, they had claimed me. I could feel it now, patient, deliberate, endless, and I understood finally that there was no escaping. Kashif, you speak, you guide, you wait like all the others. The radio crackled one last time that night, just a whisper. The crypt speaks, and now so do you. And I knew it was true, that the spirit had found me, used me, and transformed me into part of its record, part of its voice, part of the cycle that would continue long after I was gone. The crypt was patient. The crypt was deliberate. And now, I was its voice. I didn't know what drew me to it at first. That part of the graveyard had always been older, more neglected than the rest. And for years, officers and groundskeepers alike had avoided it after sundown. But something about the quietness at night, the mist curling low over the stones, made me wander. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a sense of duty, though what I was about to find felt far from any duty I had ever known. The path I followed was barely visible, overgrown with weeds that tangled my boots and clung to my pant legs. The usual rows of headstones gave way to open space, and there, standing almost impossibly well-preserved in the center, was a confession booth. I stopped dead in my tracks. It looked ordinary at first, like something out of an old church. Dark wood, faintly polished, small slats for ventilation. The craftsmanship was perfect, almost too perfect for something that should have been abandoned decades ago. I remembered reading about it in a dusty precinct log. Reports of a Catholic order long gone, a small chapel that had been dismantled when the cemetery expanded. No mention of a booth left behind. And yet, here it was intact. I approached slowly, boots crunching softly on the damp earth. The wood was cold to the touch, rough in some places, smooth in others, and I ran my hand along the edge. There was a faint smell of incense, or maybe it was decay. I couldn't tell. My flashlight cut a narrow path across the booth, illuminating a small seat inside, a tiny kneeling bench, and a lattice screen where a priest would normally have listened. "Officer!" I jumped, nearly dropping the flashlight. My radio, which had been silent all night, hissed once, just a whisper, like the static itself was trying to speak. I swallowed hard. No one was there. The cemetery was empty, the mist swirling in the weak beam of light. My hands shook, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the booth. I circled it, hesitant, examining every angle. There were no hinges or locks that looked tampered with. It was almost perfect, untouched by time or weather, despite decades of neglect all around it. The ground beneath it was firm, but I noticed faint indentations, as though someone had knelt there repeatedly. That didn't make sense. Who could have used it? Why would it remain so pristine? I stepped closer, my flashlight glinting off the tiny lattice. A chill crawled down my spine. I leaned in, peering inside. The small space was empty, but the air was different, thick, almost sticky, and it seemed to press against me, like it wanted me inside. My pulse jumped. I told myself it was just the wind, the fog, the isolation, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. "Tell me." The radio whispered again. That voice, not loud, not coherent at first, just the edge of words caught in static, calling me closer. I swallowed. My instinct screamed to leave, to run back toward the patrol car, towards safety. But something else, a force I couldn't name, made me step forward. My hand trembled as I lifted the small wooden door, the faint creak echoing in the fog. I knelt at the bench, unsure why, and the world seemed to narrow. The fog thickened, curling at my feet, brushing against the edges of the booth. The air smelled of damp wood and something else, something metallic, coppery, almost like blood. My breath hitched. I hadn't been scared like this before. Not on patrol, not in dark alleys, not even in the morgue. This felt alive. Your sins, your secrets, the voice, now just a whisper on the static, was patient. calm, insistent. I realized with a sinking certainty that the booth itself was listening. It didn't matter that no priest sat behind the lattice. I felt its gaze, its attention, and I wanted to pull away but couldn't. My hands rested on the worn wood, and the whispers grew clearer, almost forming words. Admit them, confess, do not hide. I shivered, thinking of the cases I'd handled, the things I'd seen, the choices I'd made on the job. And in that moment, kneeling in an abandoned booth in a graveyard, it felt like every decision, every corner I'd cut, every moment I'd failed, was being drawn to the surface. My chest tightened. I wanted to speak, to call out, but no words came. I felt a presence beside me, though the booth was empty, not solid, not visible, just a weight, pressing, patient, deliberate. The static hummed and the whisper followed, describing my own actions in my own words, recounting minor details of my shifts I hadn't shared with anyone. It knew. Somehow it knew. Do not light remembers. My hands trembled as I gripped the bench. The booth was more than wood and nails. It was an archive, a listener, a collector. Each whisper was a record, a memory, a confession it stored for decades, waiting for someone to kneel before it. And I was kneeling. The fog pressed closer, thickening the air around me, curling against the lattice, brushing my face, wrapping around my chest. I tried to pull away, tried to stand, but the weight of it held me down. The whispers layered, each one a different voice, murmuring, coaxing, insisting, and then distinctly a name, mine. Kashif, your sins, they did not go unnoticed. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. My mind raced through memories I had long buried, choices I had made on night shifts, corners I cut, moments I could never undo. And the booth, it cataloged them all, patient, deliberate, alive. I could feel it pressing into my skull, nudging my thoughts, forcing me to see what I had hidden from myself. The air in the booth seemed to pulse, as if breathing with me. Shadows moved along the edges of the wood, stretching impossibly long in the flashlight's beam. I could almost see the shapes of people behind the lattice, faceless, watching, waiting for confessions, feeding on the truth. My pulse jumped. I had to speak, to admit something, anything, but no words came. Speak before it is too late. I gasped, finally, words spilling from my mouth in a tremor. I failed. I failed them. The whisper paused. For a heartbeat, silence, and then the radio crackled, not just in my pocket, but in the air around me, the static humming like a low growl. Good. They hear, they remember. The fog outside thickened, curling at the edges of the booth. I could hear distant shuffling, almost like someone moving carefully among the graves, careful not to disturb the earth. But when I peered outside, nothing was there. Only the mist, only the silence, only the cold weight pressing against my chest. I stayed there until my knees ached, until the radio went silent again. The booth didn't change, didn't move, didn't release me. It had listened. It had recorded, and I knew deep down that it would not forget. The confessions of those who came before and now mine were all stored inside it, waiting for the next visitor, waiting to whisper again, waiting to pull someone else into its cold, patient attention. Finally, I stood. My legs were weak, my hands shaking. The booth loomed silently, impossibly intact, unchanging. Despite decades of neglect all around it, the fog had not lifted. The graveyard was empty, silent, yet I could still feel the weight of what I had left behind inside that little wooden space. My name, my sins, my fear, it had all been recorded, cataloged, absorbed by something patient, deliberate, and alive. I stepped back, glanced once more at the booth, and the radio crackled faintly, almost a sigh, until next time, and I knew with a deep, cold certainty that it would call again. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the confession booth looming in the mist and heard those whispers curling around my thoughts, soft and insistent. By morning, I told myself it was fatigue, nerves, maybe even imagination. But when the next shift rolled around and I drove back toward the cemetery, I realized I'd been wrong. Terribly, irrevocably wrong. It started the moment I stepped onto grounds. The mist was heavier, curling low over the earth, hiding graves, hiding paths, hiding shapes that should not have existed. My boots sank slightly in the damp soil, each step echoing in the quiet night. I felt the weight of the cemetery, of its long-dead residents, pressing in, but it wasn't just the dead. Something else was here, something patient, something aware. They hide, they always hide. The radio hissed beside me, and I jumped, clutching it. The static shifted, forming words that were soft, almost coaxing but unmistakable. The whispers weren't mine. They weren't belonging to any human I knew, but they knew things about me. Things that should have been private, never spoken aloud. And then they started telling me about the others on shift, my colleagues, officers I had trained with, walked the graveyard with, drank coffee with in the patrol room. He lied. She watched, they betrayed. The static wove a tapestry of accusations, of sins I knew had never been committed. And yet hearing them, the air grew thick, almost tangible, curling around me like fog through lungs, forcing images into my mind. Mistakes I hadn't made, betrayals I hadn't carried out, crimes I hadn't dreamed of. Each whisper added a weight to my chest, a tightness that made every breath a labor. I stopped near the old crypt at the far end, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The confession booth from the previous night sat there again, impossibly intact, the wood dark against the mist, the lattice screen inviting, as if it had been waiting for me. And in the faint glow of the beam, I saw movement, not real movement, not yet, but shadows stretching along the edges, coiling, twisting, almost alive. Listen, they remember, they repeat. The voice was clearer now, more deliberate. It began recounting acts, whispers of sin, each one more disturbing than the last. I could hear names I recognized, my colleagues, but the acts attributed to them were impossible. I knew them. I had worked with them for years. None of it was real, and yet as I listened, I could feel a creeping doubt growing, a gnawing suspicion lodged deep in my chest. Was I missing something? Could it be true? The whispers fed on the uncertainty, on the fear that maybe, just maybe, we were all capable of darker things than we admitted. He watched them suffer, she smiled, they laughed. The descriptions became vivid. I could see it all in my mind's eye, a patrol officer watching a victim, smiling as something terrible happened, another committing a crime that never occurred. And then the voice turned to me, detailing choices I had not made but could have. Every hypothetical sin, every corner cut, every moral compromise I might have committed. It was laid bare, cataloged, narrated as though it had already happened. I staggered back, the radio slipping from my hand. It hit the ground with a dull thud, but the static continued, loud, insistent, filling the air around me. I could feel in my ears, in my chest, like a heartbeat not my own. The fog thickened, curling at my ankles, rising to my knees, and the whispers became a chorus, overlapping, layering, impossible to separate. Confess, admit, they will know. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, trying to block the voices. My flashlight rolled across the ground, casting jagged shadows over the tombstones, over the mist, over the booth. And then I heard the unmistakable sound of breathing. Not mine, not human. Something pressed against the edge of my awareness. Patient, deliberate. The booth was alive. Or perhaps the spirit in it was. And it was using me, bending me, shaping me, forcing me to witness these impossible confessions. Do you see? Do you feel? Do you understand? I opened my eyes, heart hammering, and saw the mist swirl into shapes. Faces pressed against the fog, translucent, fleeting, staring at me. I recognized some, not by features, but by the weight of guilt they carried, as though the voices in the radio had conjured them from the sins they described. They moved closer with every word, not physically, but in presence, pressing into my mind, forcing me to hear, forcing me to see. Your colleagues, your friends, their sins are yours. You are the witness. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my legs refused to obey. The mist had thickened, curling around my knees, climbing higher, curling at my chest, constricting. The voices spoke faster, louder, layering hundreds of words in a single breath of static. Every sin, every imagined betrayal, Every moral compromise, real or not, pressured into me like a flood I couldn't stop. Admit it, confess, they remember, you remember. And then the whispers shifted. The radio static became intimate, directed, personal. It recounted my actions, my failures, small choices I had made on previous shifts, moment of hesitation, or oversight. It added imagined sins, acts I could never have committed, until I wasn't sure anymore what was real. I began to question myself, my memories, my mind. Had I done these things? Could I have? The booth, the fog, the whispers. They wanted me to doubt, to unravel, to break. Your sins, your guilt, they are here. They will never leave. I dropped to the ground, shivering, my hands pressed to the dirt. The mist swirled closer, filling my senses, carrying the cold, damp smell of earth and something else, something sweet and metallic. The shadows stretched along the edges of my flashlight beam, coiling and twisting, whispering, reminding, recording. My body wanted to move, to escape, but the weight in the air kept me pinned, forced to kneel, to listen, to understand. Hear them, see them, they were never forgiven. And then I saw it, at the edge of the mist, almost hidden by shadow, another figure. It was human-shaped, kneeling, watching, waiting. The whispers intensified, layering into a single command. You will confess, or you'll become part of the record. I trembled violently. The words weren't just in the radio anymore. They were in my head, spoken inside my skull, impossible to ignore. My eyes darted across the mist, across the shadows, across the confession booth that sat silently, deceptively simple, waiting. I felt my mind begin to fray, the edges of reason slipping. Every whisper, every accusation, every impossible sin threatened to drown me. Do not resist. They know you know. I stumbled backward, finally breaking free of the momentary paralysis. My flashlight shook in my hands as I tried to step away, but the mist seemed to pull at me, curling around my boots, tugging at my clothes, whispering, coaxing, promising. I realized that the booth, the radio, the fog, they were all part of the same thing, a patient, deliberate force that drew in officers like me, feeding on curiosity, on fear, on the sins we had committed or imagined. You will speak, you will confess, the record grows. I backed toward a patrol car, heart hammering, mind rattling with impossible confessions. Every step was heavy, weighted by the whispers, the faces, the fog. The radio fell silent suddenly, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the soft shuffle of the mist across the graves. And I knew with a cold certainty that silence was temporary. The voices would return. They always returned. I reached the car, hands still trembling, flashlight clutched like a lifeline. I glanced back once toward the confession booth and saw the mist swirl, almost as if in response. The shadows along the edges moved, stretching, coiling, patient and deliberate. The booth sat there, untouched, waiting for the next whisper, the next confession, the next officer to kneel before it. And I understood the sins it recounted didn't have to be real. It didn't matter. The booth wanted belief, submission, attention. It wanted to make us doubt ourselves, to unravel mind until every whisper, every accusation, every imagined crime was indistinguishable from memory. And now, I was part of its record, part of its cycle, part of the whispers it carried in the night. They will come, they always come, and you listen, you speak. I drove away that night, fog curling around the cruiser, radio silent, but my mind alive with whispers, and I knew I would return. I didn't want to, but I would. The booth was patient. It always waited. And the voices never stopped. I never thought a single night shift could feel longer than a week, but that night changed everything. The mist had returned, heavier than ever, wrapping itself around the graves like a living thing. The confession booth sat in its usual place, impossibly intact, dark with glinting faintly in my flashlight beam. I should have stayed in the patrol car. I should have driven past, pretending not to see it, pretending the radio whispers had been nothing more than imagination. But curiosity, or something darker, pulled me back. When I arrived, there was someone there. At first, I thought it was another officer, maybe someone else wandering the cemetery in the fog. But as I approached, I realized the figure wasn't normal. A young man, maybe in his 20s, kneeling at the booth, shaking. His hands gripped the edges of a small lattice, and his head bowed so low it almost touched the bench. But it wasn't prayer. Not really. Listen, witness. The voice on the radio hissed, low and deliberate, crawling into my skull like smoke. The figure at the booth lifted his head slowly, and I could see his eyes. They weren't his own. They glowed faintly, a strange amber light, hollow yet alive. My stomach churned. The whispers circled, directing my attention, pressing me forward even as my instinct screamed to run. Repeat, repeat, remember? I approached slowly, flashlight quivering in my hand. The mist curled around my boots, rising toward my knees. The young man began to speak, or rather to chant, but it wasn't his voice. It layered over itself, overlapping in strange patterns, recounting scenes I didn't want to visualize. Deaths, real ones, from past shifts, past reports, things I had only read in logs, details that shouldn't have been known to anyone present. She fell. He watched, they screamed. The officer's voice faltered, jerking with unnatural spasms, but the radio echoed every word in perfect, haunting clarity. I realized then he wasn't just speaking. He was reenacting. Every movement of his hands, his arms, his body, it was precise, ritualistic, a mimicry of the final moments of victims long gone. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of earth and decay, metallic and sweet. Admit it, bear witness. I stepped back instinctively, tripping over a gravestone. The young man's eyes, no, the eyes possessed by something else, fixed on me. His lips moved in sync with the radio's whispers. He reenacted a death from a year ago, one I had read in the patrol log only days before. A man in a back alley, cornered, and the officer who responded, a colleague, couldn't save him. The possessed penitent mimicked the final moments perfectly. The struggle, the pleading, the collapse, the body language, the facial contortions. It was too accurate, impossibly so. The record grows. I stumbled back, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. I felt the fog pressing in, curling around my chest, tightening like hands that weren't there. My pulse raced, heart hammering. The young man, or whatever had taken him over, arched backward unnaturally, screaming a soundless scream that reverberated in the fog. I could feel it in my ears, deep in my bones, vibrating against my skull. They will not be forgotten. The radio hissed violently now, static spiking as if it were live, reacting to the penitent's performance. Each reenacted death was catalogued, narrated, whispered into existence again. I could see the fear, the confusion, the final moments as though they were happening right in front of me. And then the penitent turned to the patrol logs I had left on the hood of my cruiser, as if drawn there by some invisible tether. He traced his fingers across the pages, reading aloud names, dates, times, each word amplified by the static in the air. You remember, you speak, the cycle continues. I realized, with a shiver that ran down my spine, that the booth, the fog, the whispers, they were all connected. The radio wasn't just a device. It was a conduit, a bridge, and the possessed penitent was the instrument, forced to act out sins and deaths that were recorded but somehow not finished, unfinished echoes of the past. Repeat, bear witness. The penitent's movements grew erratic, jerking violently, his back arched, hands clawing the air, fingers gripping and releasing, as if pulling memories from somewhere I could not see. And then he began to whisper names, officers I recognized, men and women who had patrolled the cemetery for years. Each name carried a story, a death, an accident. The radio hummed, static layering over his voice, each word insistent, echoing. They are here, they are known. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed. The fog pressed against me, the air thick with weight, the smell of wet earth and iron. I wanted to look away, to cover my ears, to run, but I couldn't. Something, some presence, rooted me there, forcing me to watch, forcing me to witness. The penitent mimicked another death, this one recent. A patrol log I had filed weeks before, a young woman struck in a car accident. Her last moments described in detail. The possessed man enacted it flawlessly, hands flailing, voice gasping, chest rising and falling. And then he looked at me directly, eyes hollow, voice no longer his own, and whispered, "You see? You know? You remember?" I nodded mutely. Though my throat burned, the whispers on the radio grew louder, overlapping into a roar of static-laden voices. Each one described impossible sins, unspeakable acts, horrifying accidents. The penitent twitched, fell to the ground, and yet continued, crawling along the dirt, reenacting more deaths. His body was a vessel, a tool, a mirror. They will not be ignored. The record is endless. I could see every officer who had walked the cemetery on the graveyard shift in my mind's eye. The fog twisted around their forms, each figure repeating movements, whispered names, tiny gestures caught in a loop of unseen horrors. The penitent traced each of these memories with his hands, the radio amplifying, layering, pushing me into the edges of comprehension. I wanted to turn away, but the whispers insisted I stay. The booth was patient. The fog was patient. And the penitent, what was left of him, was a conduit for something much older, much hungrier than I could understand. Admit, confess, repeat. He slumped forward, head pressing into the patrol log, fingers clutching pages like a drowning man clinging to a raft. The radio crackled, and the fog thickened, curling higher, wrapping around us both. I could feel in my lungs, cold and suffocating, and the whispers were everywhere now, inside my ears, inside my skull, forcing me to remember, forcing me to witness. The cycle, it continues, you will see. I stumbled back again, tripping over wet roots, scraping my hands and knees on the damp soil. The penitent rose partially, twitching, chanting, eyes glowing that unnatural amber, mouth moving, voice layered with static, whispering, screaming, recounting every past death in a loop. I realized with sick certainty that this would never end. Not until someone else came, kneeling, listening, witnessing. The cycle was infinite. The record grows always, always. I tried to pull out my radio, tried to flee, but the fog held me. It pressed, curling around my chest, around my legs, and I saw movement in it. Figures rising slowly from graves, shadows press against the mist, waiting, and the penitent, still enacting, still possessed, still the living recorder of sins, looked directly at me and whispered in my voice, "You will remember, you will witness, you will repeat." I fell to the ground, hands over my ears, shaking. The fog hissed around me, alive, feeding on fear, feeding on memory. And the penitent, head bowed over patrol logs, continued, perfectly synchronized with the radio, perfectly synchronized with the whispers, perfectly synchronized with the unseen force that had drawn us both here. "They will come, and you watch, you remember, you speak." I crawled backward, my mind fracturing under the weight of impossible knowledge, impossible sins, impossible deaths. The mist rose higher, pressing closer, and I knew that no one would believe what I had seen. No one would understand. But the penitent, the booth, the fog, they did not care. They only remembered. They only recorded. They only waited for the next witness, the next vessel, the next person to kneel and speak, whether they wanted to or not. And that night, as the possessed penitent reenacted horrors old and new, I realized with a hollow certainty that the cemetery had claimed me as witness. I would never forget. And if I spoke, if I tried to warn anyone, the whispers would follow, carry my voice into the fog, into the booth, into the radio. Always recorded, always repeated, always watched. The record grows, you are part of it, always. I left before dawn, hands trembling, boots wet with fog and soil, heart pounding. The penitent remained, still kneeling, still possessed, still performing impossible deaths for a witness that would never leave. And I understood then that the graveyard, the booth, the whispers, they were not content with one visitor. They would always seek another. Always. And now, I was part of the story, recorded, cataloged, and forever a witness of the horrors that came before and would come again. I had never felt true dread until that night. Not the kind you shake off when the sun rises. Not the kind you can tell yourself is just nerves or fatigue or imagination. This was something different. something that clawed at your mind and refused to let go after what I had seen with the possessed penitent. I thought I understood the danger of confession booth. I thought I could avoid it. I thought I could escape. I was wrong. I parked the cruiser at the edge of the cemetery, the mist crawling low across the graves like living fingers. Every step toward the booth felt heavier than the last, as if the fog itself weighed on me, pressing into my chest, slowing my heartbeat. The air was damp, earthy, and strange with a faint scent of decay mixed with something sweet, almost perfumed. It was a smell that stuck to your skin and lingered in your throat. The booth waited, always waiting. Dark wood, polished by time or something else. Its lattice screen intact, almost inviting, almost benign. But I knew better. I had watched someone kneel there, see them possessed by some force beyond comprehension. And now it seemed to pulse, almost imperceptibly as though alive. I approached slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip, every instinct screaming for me to turn and run. The mist curled at my boots, rising higher, twisting with purpose. And then I heard it. Whispers. Low at first, so subtle I thought it was my imagination, but unmistakably voices. Hundreds of them layered, overlapping, murmuring in countless tones, all calling, all inviting. Confess, confess, do not resist. I froze. My own voice quivered in my head as the whispers grew louder, insistent. They spoke of sins, of failures, of choices long past. But the strangest part, they were not mine alone. They spoke of other officers, other visitors, all kneeling before the booth, trapped in endless cycles. I realized then that this wasn't just a booth. It was a trap, a place where souls confessed endlessly, each whisper layered over the next, each soul feeding the next, a chain of torment I could not comprehend. Your turn, it is time. I wanted to step back, to run, but my legs refused. The fog twisted around my ankles like chains, pulling me forward, coaxing me, forcing me into the booth's shadow. The whispers climbed into my skull, filling my mind with names, dates, deeds, each confession layering onto the last until I could barely think. The memory of the possessed penitent rose before me. The way he moved, the way he reenacted deaths, the way he became a conduit for the voices of the damned. Listen, speak, remember? I fell to my knees in front of the booth. The lattice screen seemed to pulse, as if inhaling, drawing me closer. I could see faint shapes in the mist, faint outlines of previous victims, men and women who had knelt before this booth and never left. Their faces were blurred, but their presence was undeniable. I could feel their despair, their frustration, their endless repetition. And now, somehow I was part of it. Somehow, the whispers had chosen me. Confess, it is your turn. The record grows. My throat was dry, and my voice was weak when I tried to speak, but the words spilled out anyway. Names, dates, sins, both real and imagined, poured from me like blood. I tried to resist, tried to stop, but every confession made the whispers louder, the fog tighter, and the booth seemed to breathe with satisfaction. It was not just listening. It was alive, hungry for confession, feeding on our voices, our guilt, our fear. Speak. They will hear. They will remember. I remembered every detail of the deaths I had read about in the logs, every patrol report, every crime scene, and I confessed them, not for anyone, not to absolve guilt, but because the booth demanded it. And as I spoke, the voices layered over mine, overlapping, twisting my words into their own. I could hear echoes of past officers' confessions mixing with mine, their voices indistinguishable from mine. The cycle continues, always never-ending. I realized with a crushing certainty that there was no escape, not from the fog, not from the whispers, not from the booth. It had been waiting for decades, perhaps centuries, collecting, recording, feeding. Every soul that knelt here became part of it. Every confession added to its chorus. And now, I was part of that endless chorus, my voice a thread in the tapestry of torment it wove. They will come, they always come, and you join them. The air grew colder, heavier. My knees burned from kneeling. My back ached from the unnatural posture. But the whispers would not stop. The fog swirled around me, and I saw shapes moving within it. previous officers, previous visitors, kneeling, confessing, repeating. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and yet they were alive in some sense, tethered to booth, tethered to confessions, tethered to the whispers. Confess, speak, repeat. I tried to look away, tried to tear myself from the booth, but my hands moved against my will. I reached toward the lattice, touched the wood, and it was warm, almost breathing beneath my fingers. I could feel vibrations subtle but insistent, like the pulse of some immense, patient heart. The booth wanted me, needed me, and the fog pressed higher, curling around my chest, my shoulders pulling me closer. The record grows, you're now part of it, always. My mind reeled with impossibilities. The officers who had come before me, how many were there? How many voices layered over each other? The thought made my head spin. And yet, I could hear them, faintly through the mist, faintly to the fog of my own mind. Some begged, some whispered, some wailed, and now I was one of them. One more voice in an endless loop, repeating endlessly, confessing endlessly. They will not leave, the booth waits, and you speak. I tried to resist, tried to shut out the voices, but it was impossible. They were inside me now, entwined with my thoughts, shaping my memories, pushing my tongue to speak words I hadn't intended to say. I felt myself changing, my perception of reality warping. The fog was alive. The booth was alive. And I was becoming part of it. Confess, repeat, witness. Always, time became meaningless. Minutes stretched into hours. Or perhaps I had been here for decades. My sense of self fractured under the weight of endless confession. Every sin, every death, every whisper, real or imagined, became part of me. And yet, I could not stop. To stop was to resist, and resistance was impossible. The booth demanded. The whispers pressed. The fog curled tighter, and my voice rose to meet them. You belong, the cycle is complete, never-ending. I saw the fog thickening, rising like a wall around the booth. Shapes moved in the mist. Forms of the dead, forms of the damned, forms of officers who had knelt before me. Faces pale and hollow, watching. I realized then that this was not punishment. Not exactly. It was preservation. The booth preserved us all, tethered our voices, our confessions, our very essence to its lattice, to its whispers, to the endless cycle. Repeat, witness, confess. And then I understood fully. The booth did not just trap us physically. It trapped our minds, our identities, our very souls. Kneeling here, confessing endlessly, we became part of it, part of the record, part of the chorus. And eventually, we became instruments to bring in the next, to draw in the next visitor, the next officer, the next witness. You will come and they will come, and we remain. I tried to stand, but my legs refused. My hands were still on the lattice, and my mouth was still moving, still confessing, still layering my voice over the whispers of those who had knelt before me. The fog pressed close, and I felt the faint brush of unseen hands guiding me, urging me to confess more, remember more, speak more. It never ends, it never stops. You belong. Hours or lifetimes passed. I had lost all sense of time. The mist thickened further, obscuring the cemetery, hiding everything beyond the booth. And I knew that when the next officer came, drawn by curiosity, drawn by duty, drawn by some ineffable pull, the cycle would repeat. I would be a voice in the chorus, a thread in the tapestry, a witness to every impossible confession. Confess, speak, witness, repeat, always. And then I felt it, that unbearable weight of inevitability. I was not alone. I never had been. And the booth waited patient, silent in its intent, until the next set of boots disturbed the mist, until the next heart trembled, until the next officer knelt and began to confess. I tried to scream. My voice was lost among the whispers. My words dissolved into the fog, layered over countless others. And in that moment, I understood fully I would never leave. I would never escape. My turn had come, and it would never end. Eternal confession, eternal. You are part of it always,